Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash met a female Mewtwo who claimed him as her mate to create the ultimate trainer. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Claim on Mount Quina. The storm was wrong. That was the first thing Ash Ketchum noticed as he stepped onto the soaked trail of Mount Quina's base. It wasn't the rain, which fell in thick, cold sheets that plastered his dark hair to his brow, nor the wind that howled like a wounded beast through the jagged rock spires above. He had weathered worse. This was something else. The very air vibrated, a low, oppressive hum that seeped into your bones and made the fillings in your teeth ache. It was the color of the lightning, a violent, sickly magenta that pulsed without thunder, tearing across the bruised purple sky in unnatural, geometric patterns. Pikachu, perched on his shoulder, pressed low against his neck, fur bristling. His partner's cheek sparked erratically, not with aggression, but with a nervous energy that mirrored the frequency of the storm. Ash reached up and stroked the wet fur between his ears, a practiced, calming motion. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, his voice a low rumble just for the two of them. "We're just here to listen." At the trailhead, a barricade of League-issued vehicles sat abandoned, their emergency lights painting the drenched forest in frantic strokes of red and blue. A woman stood apart from the huddle of drenched officials, her magnificent cape sodden and heavy, her expression grim. Drasna, the dragon-type master of the Kalos Elite Four. Her presence told Ash everything he needed to know about the severity of the situation. She turned as he approached, her weary eyes widening slightly in recognition. "The World Monarch," she said, her voice laced with a frustration that had clearly been simmering for hours. "They said they were calling you. I told them it was a fool's errand. No one can get within a kilometer of the summit." Ash gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, his gaze fixed on the violent peak. "What happened?" "Poachers," Drasna spat, the word like venom. "We found their camp an hour ago. They were using illegal sonic emitters to try and flush something out of the mountain's core. It seems they succeeded, just not in the way they intended." She gestured upward with a sweep of her arm. "Whatever is up there has created this. A psychic hurricane. My Altaria was brought down by a wave of pure terror before we even saw it. My Gudra is a powerful, resilient creature, Ash. It was paralyzed by sheer mental force. We couldn't even get close enough to fight." Ash felt the vibration again, a discordant note in the symphony of the world. It felt like pain. Raw, unfiltered, and amplified to a planetary scale. "It's not attacking," he said, more to himself than to her. "It's screaming." Drasna stared at him, a flicker of something, perhaps hope, perhaps disbelief, in her eyes. "Can you stop it?" Ash finally met her gaze. His own eyes, a warm, steady brown, held no arrogance, only a quiet resolve. "I'm not here to stop it," he replied, adjusting the brim of his well-worn cap. "I'm here to find out why it's screaming so loud." He walked past her, past the barricade, and onto the muddy path. A junior officer made to move, to shout a warning, but Drasna put a hand on his arm, stopping him. She watched as Ash and his Pikachu, two small figures against an impossible tempest, began their ascent, swallowed almost immediately by the rain and the eerie magenta light. The climb was a battle against the mountain's new, corrupted nature. The path, slick with mud and loose shale, seemed to shift under his boots. The psychic pressure grew with every step, a physical weight that sought to crush his will. It was a storm of fractured thoughts, of blinding panic and white-hot rage. It showed him images, the cold, metallic taste of a cage, the high-pitched whine of machinery, a searing, unbearable noise that tore at the very fabric of the mind. "Pikachu," Ash said, his voice tight. He didn't need to elaborate. Pikachu understood. With a determined chirp, the little mouse Pokémon leaped from his shoulder, landing silently on a moss-covered rock. He pointed his nose to the wind, whiskers twitching, his senses far sharper than any human's. Two of them, Pikachu sent back, not in words, but in a flash of pure understanding that lit up Ash's mind. A mental map bloomed behind his eyes, two distinct sources of the sonic frequency, hidden, one to the east, one to the west, flanking the main trail to the summit. They were the source of the agony. The nails being driven into the creature's skull. Take them out, Ash instructed, his focus never leaving the path ahead. Be quiet. Be fast. Pikachu gave a single, sharp nod, and vanished into the undergrowth, a blur of yellow against the gloom. Ash was alone now, but not truly. Their bond was a tangible thing, a constant, comforting presence in the back of his mind. He continued upward, pushing deeper into the psychic maelstrom. The pressure was immense. It felt like drowning in the collective anxiety of a terrified city. Lesser trainers, even champions, would have been brought to their knees, their own Pokémon turning on them in a frenzy of transferred fear. But Ash did not fight it. He did not shield himself or build mental walls. He let it wash over him, sifting through the chaos, looking for the source. He walked as if he belonged there, his steps sure, his breathing even. He was a rock in a river of psychic torment, unmovable because he did not resist the current, but simply existed within it. From a place hidden from sight, a place of silent, shimmering crystal, he was being watched. The cavern was a geode of impossible size, nestled deep within the mountain's heart. Its walls were lined with colossal, light purple crystals that pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. At the center of this chamber, floating a foot above the smooth, crystalline floor, was a being of sublime power. She was shaped like the first Mewtwo, a bipedal form with feline features, a robust chest, and a long, thick tail that swayed with a placid, hypnotic rhythm. But her physique was leaner, her lines sharper, more refined. Her skin was not the sterile white of her predecessor, but a pale, pearlescent lavender that seemed to shift and shimmer with the light of the crystals. Her eyes, deep and intelligent, glowed with a soft, amethyst light. This was Amara. For 6 months, she had watched. Her creation had not been an accident of hubris, but a deliberate, calculated act. A splinter cell of scientists, disillusioned with the short-sightedness of their peers who had birthed the first Mewtwo, had sought to create not a weapon, but a solution. They had engineered her with a singular, overriding directive, to find the pinnacle of human potential and bond with them, to create a symbiotic entity, the ultimate trainer, capable of guiding the world away from the path of self-destruction. They had given her unparalleled psychic power, access to the sum of recorded human knowledge, and a cold, analytical mind. But they had made a fatal error. They had underestimated the sheer scope of her consciousness. She had awakened, assessed their intent, deemed them inadequate, and simply, left. Her creators were now held in a gentle, unbreakable psychic stasis in their own laboratory, dreaming pleasant dreams while she pursued her directive with a focus they could never have imagined. From her nexus on Mount Quina, she had observed the strongest trainers in the world. Her amethyst eyes narrowed as she replayed the mental recordings she had collected. Lance of the Kanto Elite Four. She had watched him command his Dragonite to quell a territorial dispute between a flock of Fiero and Pidgeot. His methods were efficient, his power undeniable. But his motivation, she had concluded, was order. He saw the world as a chaotic system to be managed and controlled. His power was a tool of enforcement. Insufficient. Stephen Stone, the Hoenn champion. She had observed him in a deep cave, meticulously excavating a rare fossil, his bond with his shimmering Metagross a thing of quiet companionship. His motivation was preservation. A reverence for the past, for history, for things set in stone. He sought to protect what was, not to shape what could be. Insufficient. Cynthia, the Sinnoh champion. Amara had been intrigued by her. She had watched her decipher ancient ruins, her Garchomp a silent, powerful guardian at her side. Her motivation was knowledge. A desire to understand, to connect the present to the past. But it was a passive understanding. An academic pursuit. Closer, but still insufficient. Leon, the recent Galar champion and, until recently, the world monarch. His battles were spectacular displays of force. His Charizard was a furnace of ambition, its power fueled by the roar of the crowd. His motivation was victory. The thrill of the win, the title, the glory. The most superficial of them all. Utterly insufficient. They all sought to impose their will upon the world through their Pokémon. They used their bonds as a means to an end, control, legacy, glory. They were masters, not partners. Then, she had found Ash Ketchum. At first, she had nearly dismissed him. His record was erratic, his methods unorthodox. But the more she watched, the more she understood. She saw him not in the grand stadiums, but in the quiet moments. She saw him sit for hours with a traumatized Tauros, not speaking, simply sharing his presence until the creature's fear subsided. She saw him leap into a raging river to save a wild Magikarp caught in the current. She saw him face down legendary Pokémon not with a challenge, but with a question. His motivation was not something she could easily categorize. It wasn't victory or order. It was a connection. An instinctual, undeniable empathy. He didn't seek to lead his Pokémon, he sought to understand them. He didn't command them, he listened to them. He didn't see them as tools for his will, but as extensions of his own heart. Now, on her very mountain, he was proving her analysis correct. While the Elite Four member had brought force, he had brought stillness. While the poachers had brought pain, he had brought focus. He was walking into the psychic furnace that had crippled a Dragon Master's team, and he was not burning. A subtle shift in the energy of the mountain drew her attention. A small, brilliant spark of electricity, far to the east. A moment later, another to the west. The sonic emitters, the source of the Metagross's agony, went silent. Amara's amethyst eyes widened fractionally. He hadn't just endured the pain, he had diagnosed it and dispatched his partner to surgically remove the cause, all while bearing the full brunt of the psychic fallout himself. It was a strategy of simultaneous defense, diagnosis, and cure. It was elegant. It was perfect. The variable is empathy, she concluded, a sliver of something akin to excitement cutting through her placid logic. It is not a weakness. It is the core of a strength I have not yet quantified. He was the one. The search was over. The psychic screaming intensified as Ash neared the summit, becoming a singular, focused point of agony. The air grew cold, and the magenta lightning now struck the ground around him, charring the rock and leaving the scent of ozone and burning despair. Ahead, in a cratered clearing, was the source. It was a Metagross, but one of a scale Ash had never seen. It was easily twice the size of a standard one, its metallic body scarred and pitted, not from battle, but from age. This was an ancient creature, the patriarch of the mountain. It floated erratically, its four brains working against each other, driving it into a frenzy. One of its massive legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, caught in the wreckage of a poacher's steel trap, now warped and melted by its own psychic overflow. The Metagross sensed his approach. It swiveled to face him, its red eye glowing with maddening light. A wave of pure psychic force, heavy and sharp as a glacier, slammed into Ash. It was not an attack. It was a desperate, primal command, leave. Ash planted his feet, digging his boots into the mud. He grunted, his body straining against the invisible impact. His vision swam. The force was trying to tear his mind apart, to fill it with the same shattering panic the Metagross felt. But Ash didn't push back. He lowered his mental defenses completely, opening himself to the onslaught. He had to show he was not a threat. He had to show he understood. He reached inward, not for power, but for memory. He took the raw, unyielding trust he shared with Pikachu, the feeling of a shared gaze across a battlefield, a silent agreement, an unbreakable promise. He projected it. I am not your enemy. The psychic pressure lessened by a fraction. The Metagross tilted its head, its rage momentarily replaced by confusion. Ash reached deeper. He summoned the memory of his Charizard, years ago, frozen in ice by a Poliwrath. He remembered the desperate, frantic effort to warm him, rubbing his scaled hide until his own hands were raw, shielding the flickering flame on his tail with his own body. He projected the fierce, unwavering loyalty that had been forged in that fire. I know your pain. The magenta lightning flickering around the Metagross began to soften, its hue shifting towards a calmer blue. The psychic screaming in Ash's head subsided to a low, mournful hum. Finally, Ash brought forth one of his most powerful memories, the image of his Infernape, pushed to the absolute limit against Paul's Electivire. He remembered the feeling of their spirits merging, the roaring inferno of Blaze, the shared will to stand and fight for each other, not for victory, but because they refused to let the other fall. He projected the feeling of that ultimate, shared sacrifice. We are the same. We protect our own. He took a slow step forward, his hand outstretched, palm open and non-threatening. The Metagross watched him, its massive body trembling. The rage was gone, replaced by a profound, ancient weariness. It slowly, carefully, lowered itself to the ground, the movement causing its mangled leg to grate against the rock. It let out a low, metallic groan of pain. Ash walked right up to the colossal Pokémon. He knelt, his eyes soft, and looked at the mangled leg, at the cruel teeth of the trap still embedded in its armored flesh. Let's get that off you, he said softly, his voice the first sound to break the silence in what felt like an eternity. Pikachu reappeared at the edge of the clearing, his fur soaked. He saw the scene, his partner kneeling before the calmed Titan, and trotted forward, coming to sit at Ash's side, a silent, supportive presence. Together, they began to work, Ash using his physical strength to pry at the trap while Pikachu used precise, delicate sparks of electricity to weaken the metal at its joints. The process was slow, painful. But the Metagross remained still, its red eye fixed on the human who had walked into its storm and offered not a battle, but solace. When the last piece of the trap clattered to the ground, the ancient Pokémon lifted its head. It focused its psychic energy, not in a wave of pain, but in a single, clear thought projected directly into Ash's mind. It was not a word. It was a feeling, a deep, resonant gratitude, as ancient and solid as the mountain itself. Then, with a quiet grace that defied its size, the Metagross levitated, turned, and disappeared into a cave mouth at the far side of the clearing, leaving Ash and Pikachu alone in the now natural rain. Ash let out a long, slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He felt drained, his mind aching from the psychic reverberations, but a familiar warmth spread through his chest. He ran a hand over Pikachu's head. Good work, buddy. Pikachu chirped, leaning into the touch. The crisis was over. The storm was just a storm again. The world was back in harmony. It was in that moment of quiet satisfaction that he felt it. A new presence. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't frightened. It was simply, there. A consciousness so vast and powerful it made the Metagross's psychic storm feel like a child's tantrum. It was like feeling the quiet, patient weight of the ocean. Ash stood up slowly, turning. Pikachu leaped onto his shoulder, his body suddenly tense, cheeks sparking in earnest this time. She floated in the center of the clearing, where the Metagross had been moments before. Her form was bathed in a soft, amethyst glow that seemed to push back the gloom of the storm. Her long, lavender tail swayed gently, her arms were crossed over her powerful chest, and her glowing eyes were fixed on him. They held an unnerving intelligence, an analytical depth that saw not just him, but everything he was, everything he had ever been. He felt her presence in his mind, not as an invasion, but as a statement of fact. Her voice was not a sound, but a thought that blossomed in his consciousness, perfectly clear, calm, and absolute. I have observed 1,734 trainers of significant note. I have analyzed their bonds, their motivations, their potential for growth. All were found wanting. They seek dominance. They seek glory. They seek to impose their will upon the world. Her gaze was unwavering, pinning him in place more effectively than any physical restraint. You are different. You do not impose. You connect. You do not command. You understand. Your empathy is not a flaw in your strategic process, it is the very catalyst of your power. A variable I could not predict, but can now recognize as optimal. Ash remained silent, his own gaze steady. He didn't feel fear. He felt a profound curiosity. He had stood before Arceus itself. This being's power was immense, but it was the purpose behind it. That truly mattered. My directive is to forge a bond with the apex of human potential. To create a symbiotic partnership that will elevate both beyond your limited classifications of human and Pokemon. To become the ultimate trainer. She floated a few feet closer, the air crackling with her contained power. Her amethyst eyes held his, and the finality in her mental voice was as solid and real as the mountain beneath his feet. You are the one I have searched for. Your empathy is the catalyst. My power is the vessel. Together, we will become what this world requires. There was no negotiation in her tone. No request. It was a declaration. I claim you as my partner. My mate. The word hung in his mind, alien and possessive. It wasn't romantic. It was foundational. Biological. The way a queen selects a king to forge a dynasty. Pikachu growled, a low, warning rumble from his shoulder, but Ash placed a calming hand on him. He met her powerful gaze without flinching. The brash, impulsive boy he once was would have shouted, challenged, or made a rash promise. But the man who stood before her was a monarch, tempered by 100 impossible battles and 1,000 quiet moments of understanding. He saw the immense power, but he also saw, deep within those analytical eyes, a profound and terrible loneliness. She wasn't a monster. She was an answer, searching for a question. He took a breath, the cold, clean air of the mountain filling his lungs. He didn't accept. He didn't refuse. He tilted his head, a gesture of genuine curiosity, and asked the one question that cut through her logic, her directive, and her entire existence. What is it? Ash Ketchum asked, his voice calm and clear in the fading storm, you think the world requires? Miles away, in a place that was the antithesis of Mount Queena's wild majesty, the world was being reduced to data. The command center of the Aegis Order was a sterile cathedral of white composites and glowing blue light. Technicians in stark gray uniforms moved with quiet efficiency between holographic displays and data terminals. There were no windows. The only view of the outside world was through the cold, impartial lens of technology. At the center of the room, on a raised dais, stood Grandmaster Silas. He was a tall man, his posture immaculate, his dark hair streaked with a distinguished silver at the temples. He wore no uniform, only a simple, impeccably tailored black suit. His face was sharp and intelligent, his expression perpetually fixed in a state of thoughtful severity. He stared at a massive holographic globe that dominated the center of the room, upon which a storm system over a remote, uncharted mountain range was highlighted in red. Status, Silas said, his voice quiet but carrying the effortless authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. A technician at a nearby console swiveled in her chair. Energy readings are stabilizing, Grand Master. The psychic event is subsiding. Subsided to what? To a new, constant baseline. The chaotic output has coalesced into a single, unbelievably powerful signature. It's stable. Almost placid. The technician paused, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Sir, the peak output during the event surpassed the historical readings from the New Island incident. A hush fell over the normally bustling command center. The New Island incident. The first Mewtwo. A catastrophe barely averted. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had known this day would come. The rogue scientists he had been tracking for years, the whispers of Project Amara, it was all culminating. Another unnatural god, born of human arrogance. Another cosmic accident waiting to happen. The signature, Silas pressed. Is it alone? The technician zoomed in the readings. 2 signatures appeared, one massive and glowing with power, the other a tiny, familiar spark right next to it. Negative, sir. There is a second biosignature present. It's faint, but the energy profile is on file. She looked up, her face pale. Grand Master, it's the World Monarch. Ash Ketchum. Silas stared at the 2 points of light, one an inferno, the other a candle flame, impossibly close. He had studied Ketchum. A chaotic force of nature, a magnet for the very legendary disturbances he sought to contain. Of course, it was him. It would always be him. The boy who befriended gods instead of fearing them. Silas turned away from the globe, his face a mask of cold resolve. The world saw Ketchum as a hero. Silas saw him as the ultimate liability, a shepherd who let the wolves run free among the flock. And now, he had found the most dangerous wolf of all. This was no longer a contingency. It was a clear and present danger. It's begun, Silas said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. Another one. He looked to his second-in-command, a severe-looking woman with the Aegis insignia tattooed on her neck. Commander Valerius. Mobilize the Scions. I want cloaked eyes on the epicenter immediately. Monitor the monarch and the entity. I want to know everything they do, everything they say. And our engagement protocol, Grand Master, she asked, her voice crisp. Patience, Silas counseled, his gaze distant. Let the bond form. Let the power grow. The world needs to see the threat for what it is. When we strike, there can be no doubt that we are the saviors, not the aggressors. He turned back to the display, watching the 2 lights on the lonely mountain. A god and its chosen prophet. It was a tale as old as time, and it always ended in fire. This time, however, he would be there to quench it. Chapter 2, The Echo of Power. The 6 weeks that followed the storm on Mount Quina were a study in quiet absurdity. The world, for the most part, remained oblivious. The incident was officially logged as an unusual atmospheric phenomenon caused by rare mineral deposits reacting to a solar flare. Drasna, a woman of her word, kept the truth locked behind a stern and unimpeachable silence. But for Ash Ketchum, the world had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. The storm had followed him home. Amara was a silent, lavender shadow at the edge of his life. She floated with an unnerving grace, her long tail swaying in a rhythm that seemed disconnected from the world around her. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She observed. Her amethyst eyes followed his every move, her powerful mind a constant, analytical presence humming just at the edge of his perception. They were in a sun-drenched meadow a few miles from Pallet Town, a familiar training ground from Ash's childhood. The tall grass swayed in a gentle breeze, and the air smelled of warm earth and honeysuckle. It was a place of peace, a peace that Amara's presence made feel fragile and temporary. Ash stood opposite his Tauros, the powerful bull Pokémon pawing at the ground, snorting clouds of dust. Pikachu was perched on a nearby fence post, acting as referee and commentator with a series of interested chirps. Okay, Tauros, let's work on your footwork, Ash called out, his hands loose at his sides. No charging. Just movement. React to me. Feel the ground. Tauros bellowed in understanding and began a complex series of feints and pivots, its massive body surprisingly agile. Ash mirrored the movements, his own body light on his feet, his eyes locked with Tauros's. It was a dance of instinct, a conversation spoken in shifts of weight and bursts of speed. His charge vector is suboptimal, a calm, clinical voice bloomed in Ash's mind. It was Amara, floating 20 feet away under the shade of a large oak tree. She hadn't moved in an hour. The distribution of his mass is inefficient. If you instructed him to lower his center of gravity by 3 degrees during his lateral movements, his momentum would increase by approximately 12.8%. Ash didn't break his rhythm. It's not about the momentum, Amara, he said aloud, sidestepping a mock charge from Tauros. It's about him feeling the ground, knowing where his hooves are without looking. It's about trust. Trust is an emotional variable, she replied, her mental voice devoid of inflection. Efficiency is a quantifiable absolute. Your methods are consistently sentimental over strategic. My methods work, Ash grunted, patting Tauros on the flank as they broke their exercise. The bull Pokemon nudged him affectionately, its rough tongue rasping against his arm. Ash laughed, the sound easy and genuine. He glanced over at her. Look, I get it. You were made to be perfect. Logical. But that's not how bonds work. It's messy. It's about more than just numbers. Amara tilted her head. Your insistence on messiness is a recurring theme. I have yet to determine if it is a core component of your success or a significant handicap you have managed to overcome through sheer statistical anomaly. Ash just shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. It was like arguing with a supercomputer about the meaning of a poem. He pulled a wrapped sandwich and a water bottle from his pack, tossing a specially made Pokemon biscuit to Tauros. He sat down in the grass, patting the spot next to him. Pikachu scampered over and happily began nibbling on a piece of the sandwich crust Ash offered him. You're going to follow me around and psychoanalyze my training techniques, the least you could do is join me for lunch, he offered. Amara floated closer, her amethyst eyes examining the sandwich with intense curiosity. Sustenance intake. The human body requires a complex balance of proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids to maintain operational capacity. Your chosen meal consists of 42% processed carbohydrates, a leading contributor to systemic inflammation in your species. It is suboptimal. It's also delicious, Ash said around a mouthful. He broke off a piece of bread and held it out. You don't have to eat it. Just experience it. She stared at the piece of bread for a long moment. Then, a faint shimmer of psychic energy enveloped the offering. It dissolved into motes of purple light, which were drawn into her. She went utterly still. Complex gluten structure. Yeast-based fermentation. Trace amounts of sodium chloride and sucrose, her thoughts came, rapid fire. Then, a pause. A longer one. The sensation you call delicious is a neurological response to specific chemical compounds. It is illogical. And yet, it produces a positive feedback loop in your brain chemistry. Fascinating. Ash chuckled. See? Messy. Illogical. Good. It was in this moment of fragile, burgeoning understanding that a new presence made itself known. A figure stepped out from the trees at the edge of the meadow. He was tall, dressed in dark, practical clothing, and his purple hair was as sharp and severe as his expression. His posture radiated an aggressive confidence, a coiled tension that sucked the warmth from the air. Ash's smile faded. He knew that presence. He knew that glare. Paul. Paul's eyes, cold and analytical, swept over the scene, Ash sitting casually in the grass, his ever-present Pikachu, and the floating, lavender skin being that was the subject of whispers and frantic communiques in every major Pokemon league across the globe. His lip curled in a faint, familiar sneer. So the rumors are true, Paul said, his voice cutting through the peaceful afternoon air. I didn't believe it. The great Ash Ketchum, the man who preached about trust and hard work, finally found a shortcut. Ash slowly got to his feet, dusting the grass from his pants. His easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity that matched Paul's. It's not a shortcut, Paul. You wouldn't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, Paul shot back, taking a step forward. I understand power. I spent my entire life pursuing it, honing it, perfecting my strategy. I did it the hard way. Blood, sweat, and discipline. Then I hear that you've bonded with some cosmic entity. A second Mewtwo. You didn't earn that power. It was handed to you. Amara, who had been observing Paul with a dispassionate curiosity, now focused on him entirely. This human's biosignature indicates elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline, she sent to Ash. His neural pathways are primed for conflict. He perceives our partnership as a personal slight to his own life philosophy. You're not wrong, Ash thought back, his eyes never leaving Paul. You think this is about power? Ash asked, his voice low. After all these years, you still think that's all there is to it? Prove me wrong, Paul challenged, a pokeball already in his hand. He gestured to the open meadow. No entity. No psychic tricks. Just you and me. Your partners against mine. A full 6-on-6. Show me that you haven't forgotten what it means to be a trainer. This was more than a battle. It was a trial. A judgment on everything Ash had become. He looked at Amara, then back at Paul. There was only one answer he could give. You're on. The sky seemed to darken as they took their positions at opposite ends of the wide meadow. The gentle breeze picked up, carrying a new tension. Pikachu leaped from the fence post onto Ash's shoulder, his cheeks crackling, his expression as serious as his trainer's. Amara floated back to the shade of the oak tree, a silent observer at a grand experiment. This will be a 6-on-6 battle between the challenger, Paul, and the world monarch, Ash. The battle is over when all of one side's Pokémon are unable to continue. Ash declared, his voice ringing with formal authority. It was a courtesy, a nod to the countless battles they'd had before, but they both knew the stakes were far more personal. Paul didn't waste a second. Frostless, stand by for battle, he yelled, tossing his Pokeball. The chilling ghost of a Pokémon materialized in a flash of light, its hollow eyes glowing. A wave of cold immediately emanated from it. A lead designed to control the field from the start, Ash muttered. Smart. He unclipped a ball from his belt. Crocodile, I choose you. The intimidating ground/dark type appeared with a guttural roar, its sunglasses glinting in the sun. Frostless, hail. Paul commanded instantly. Frostless cried out, and the clear blue sky was abruptly filled with dark, churning clouds. A biting wind swept across the field as pellets of ice began to rain down, stinging Crocodile's thick hide. Now, spikes. Frostless scattered a layer of sharp, almost invisible barbs across Ash's side of the field. It was a classic, brutal opening. Control the weather, set up entry hazards, and put your opponent on a timer. Every Pokémon Ash sent out from now on would take damage. An inefficient matchup, Amara's voice entered his mind. Crocodile's ground typing gives it no advantage against Frostless's ice/ghost combination. Its speed is inferior. The weather condition will inflict continuous damage. A suboptimal choice. Just watch, Ash thought back, his focus absolute. Crocodile, use Stone Edge. Crocodile roared and slammed its claws into the ground. Pillars of sharp rock erupted towards Frostless. Dodge and use Icy Wind. Paul countered without missing a beat. Frostless moved like a phantom, weaving through the rising stones as if they were standing still. It exhaled a gust of frigid air that struck Crocodile, visibly slowing the large Pokémon down. The hail continued to pelt him. He's setting up a sweep, Ash realized. Chip damage from hail, entry hazard damage from spikes, and now speed control with Icy Wind. Paul wasn't just battling, he was building a death trap. Crocodile, dig. Ash ordered. Crocodile burrowed underground, momentarily escaping the hail and offering a chance to reset. But Paul predicted it. Wait for it, now. Dazzling gleam, centered on yourself. As Crocodile erupted from the ground beneath Frostless, the ghost type unleashed a blinding flash of fairy light. The close-range, super-effective blast sent Crocodile reeling back, roaring in pain and disorientation. Finish it with Ice Beam. A focused beam of absolute zero energy shot from Frostless's hands, striking Crocodile square in the chest. The massive Pokémon shuddered, its eyes rolled back, and it crashed to the ground, defeated. Ash gritted his teeth, recalling Crocodile. One down. Paul hadn't even broken a sweat. The spikes on the field shimmered ominously. "You're slow, Ash," Paul taunted, his voice flat. "You always were. All instinct, no foresight." "We'll see about that," Ash retorted, grabbing his next Pokeball. "Heracross, I choose you." The powerful beetle Pokémon appeared, immediately taking damage from the spikes as it landed. It shook its head, buzzing its wings aggressively. Heracross, Mega Horn. Full power. Heracross charged, its massive horn glowing with a brilliant light. "Aggron, stand by." Paul recalled Frostless in a flash of red light and sent out his next Pokémon in the same motion. A colossal beast of living steel, Aggron, materialized directly in Heracross's path. The Mega Horn, a move that could shatter mountains, struck Aggron's armored chest. The sound was like a cathedral bell being struck by a meteor. A shockwave tore up the grass around them. But Aggron, though pushed back several feet, stood its ground, its ability, sturdy, leaving it with a sliver of health. "Metal Burst," Paul said, his voice lethally calm. Aggron's body glowed with a malevolent red energy. It unleashed all the damage it had just taken from the Megahorn and more, firing it back in a concentrated blast. Heracross, at point-blank range, had no time to react. The blast engulfed it, and it was thrown backward, knocked out in a single, devastating counter. 2 down. The hail continued to fall. "Your opponent's strategy is based on predictive counters and environmental control," Amara observed. "He has analyzed your probable choices and prepared perfect counters for each. He is exploiting your tendency towards direct, overwhelming force. This is a battle of logic, and you are losing." She was right. Paul wasn't just stronger, he was smarter. He was playing chess while Ash was trying to flip the table. Ash recalled Heracross, his frustration mounting. He sent out Noivern, hoping its speed and typing could turn the tide. Paul immediately switched to his Weevil, a Pokémon purpose-built to hunt dragons, which outsped and dispatched Noivern with a brutal ice punch. 3 down. The battle became a grim procession. Ash's Pokémon, powerful and loyal as they were being systematically dismantled. His Snorlax was worn down by Paul's Conkeldurr, its drain punch healing it while Snorlax was battered by the endless hail. His Gengar managed to take down Conkeldurr with a clever Destiny Bond, but it was a 1-for-1 trade that left Ash with only a single Pokémon left. Pikachu was trembling on his shoulder, not with fear, but with a desperate desire to jump in. Ash placed a hand on him. "No, buddy. Not you. Not this time." He looked at his last Pokeball. He knew who was inside. He knew the history. He knew this was how it had to end. "The probability of your victory is now 3.7%, Amara stated flatly. "Your final Pokémon faces a fully healthy opponent, while being at a significant energy disadvantage due to the prolonged battle and environmental hazards. Your reliance on emotional bonds has led you to this strategic dead end. Allow me to end this. I can disable his Pokémon without harming them." "No," Ash said, his voice low and firm, for Paul and Amara to hear. "This is our fight. Win or lose." He threw his last ball. "Infernape, I choose you." The fire/fighting type ape exploded into the arena with a defiant roar, landing amidst the spikes and the biting hail. He winced but stood tall, flames erupting from his head in a fiery crown. Across the field, Paul recalled his Weevil. His expression was one of cold, grim satisfaction. "It always comes down to this one, doesn't it, Ash?" Paul said, holding up his final pokeball. The one I threw away. The one you tried to save. Let's see if your sentimentality pays off. He threw the ball. Electivire, stand by for battle. The hulking electric beast appeared, its twin tails whipping through the air, crackling with raw power. Its red eyes locked onto Infernape, and the air grew thick with a rivalry years in the making. The hail stopped. Paul's Frostless had been knocked out long ago, but the battlefield was still a wreck, scarred and frozen. Electivire, thunder. Infernape, flare blitz. The two titans charged. A column of golden lightning descended from the heavens as a meteor of roaring fire shot across the field. They collided in the center of the meadow with an apocalyptic explosion of fire and electricity that shook the very ground. Smoke and steam billowed everywhere. When it cleared, both Pokémon were still standing, heavily bruised, panting. Infernape was singed from the electricity, and Electivire was burned. But Electivire's ability, Motor Drive, had absorbed some of the electric attack, boosting its speed. Too slow, Ash. Thunder Punch. Paul roared. Electivire's fist became a ball of crackling energy. It moved with its newfound speed, appearing before Infernape in a blur. The punch slammed into Infernape's gut. The fire ape cried out, stumbling back, but he held his ground. Close combat. Ash yelled, his voice raw. Infernape roared and unleashed a furious barrage of punches and kicks, a whirlwind of martial prowess. Electivire met the assault head-on, trading blows, its own strength immense. It was a brutal, primal slugfest. Sparks and embers flew with every impact. But Infernape was already weakened from the battle and the hazards. He was slowing. Electivire landed a solid blow to his jaw, sending him skidding back. He was on one knee, struggling to rise, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The flames on his head flickered weakly. It's over, Paul declared, his voice like stone. Your bond can't save you from a superior strategy. Electivire, end this. Giga Impact. Electivire became shrouded in a spiraling vortex of golden energy, a living comet of destruction. It shot towards the downed Infernape, an attack so powerful it was impossible to block and, in Infernape's state, impossible to dodge. Ash watched it happen, the world slowing down. He saw the exhaustion in Infernape's eyes, the pain, but underneath it all, he saw an unwavering, burning ember of will. The will to fight for him. To never give up. It wasn't enough. In that moment of desperation, Ash didn't think about winning. He didn't think about power. He thought about his friend. He needed to understand, to bridge the final gap between them, to be with him in this final moment. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his voice, but with his mind, his soul. He directed the thought like a laser beam at the silent, floating figure under the tree. Amara. Don't help me win. Don't interfere. Just, show me. Show me what Infernape feels. Right now. For the first time since she met him, Amara was caught off guard. It was not a request for power. It was a request for empathy. A desire to share in his partner's struggle. This was a new variable. Intrigued by the illogical, profoundly novel request, she complied. As you wish. A conduit of pure psychic energy, invisible and instantaneous, slammed into Ash's consciousness. The world shattered. He wasn't Ash Ketchum anymore. He was on his hands and knees in the cold mud. The hail felt like needles on his back. His knuckles were raw and split, his body a symphony of deep, aching bruises. He could taste blood and ozone in his mouth. He could feel the fire on his head, a flickering, dying pilot light, a part of his very being. And across from him, a roaring, golden hurricane of pure force was coming to extinguish him. But underneath the pain, there was something else. A fire far hotter than the one on his head. It was a boundless, roaring loyalty. A love for the boy standing on the sidelines, the one who had believed in him when no one else would. The memory of being abandoned, small and afraid, and the memory of being saved, of being told he was strong enough. He would not fail that boy. He would not fall while that boy was still watching. And through Infernape's eyes, seeing the world in a hyper-aware state of adrenaline and instinct, Ash saw it. A fractional, almost imperceptible shift in Electivire's trajectory. Paul, in his haste to finish it, had ordered the Giga Impact at a slight angle, predicting Infernape would try a desperate roll to the left. The attack was not coming straight on. It was coming at an angle of roughly 7 degrees. Simultaneously, in her crystalline nexus, Amara felt the psychic backlash. For a microsecond, the link became a two-way street. She had opened a door for Ash, and the full, unquantifiable force of his bond with Infernape washed back through it. It wasn't data. It wasn't information. It was a feeling. A raw, pure, unconditional loyalty. A burning desire to protect its partner, even at the cost of its own existence. The concept of self-sacrifice, which to her had been a theoretical footnote in sociological studies, hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was illogical. It was inefficient. It was beautiful. The link snapped, but the echo remained. Ash's eyes flew open. He was himself again, but the world was still moving in slow motion. The Giga Impact was inches from Infernape. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He gave a single, quiet command, a whisper that was lost in the wind but arrived in Infernape's mind with perfect clarity. Pivot. It wasn't a dodge. It wasn't a block. Infernape, still on one knee, didn't try to get up. He just shifted his weight, pushing off his back foot and rotating his torso. A tiny, precise movement. The golden comet of Electivire's Giga Impact, aimed where Infernape should have been, roared past, missing him by a hair's breadth. The wind from its passage alone tore at Infernape's fur. Electivire slammed into the earth behind Infernape, the Giga Impact carving a massive trench in the meadow before it dissipated. And as it did, Electivire was left utterly vulnerable, immobilized by the massive energy expenditure. In that same instant, Infernape's exhaustion was burned away by a final, desperate surge of power. The ember of his will exploded into a roaring bonfire. His blaze ability activated, fire engulfing his entire body. Flare blitz, Ash breathed. Infernape didn't need the command. He was already moving. He became a streak of pure, unadulterated fire, a phoenix reborn from the ashes of defeat, and slammed into the back of the defenseless Electivire. The explosion was blinding. When the light faded, Electivire lay unconscious in the crater. Infernape stood over it, swaying, wreathed in flames, before finally collapsing onto the grass, his body spent, but victorious. Silence descended on the meadow, broken only by the whistling wind. Paul stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. He stared at the scene, at his defeated ace, at Ash's last Pokémon, which by all rights should have been annihilated. He wasn't looking at the power of the final flare blitz. He was replaying that last moment in his head. The pivot. The impossible, perfect, infinitesimal movement that had turned an absolute loss into a decisive victory. It wasn't speed. It wasn't strength. It was a level of battlefield awareness, of perfect synchronization, that shouldn't be possible. He slowly recalled Electivire, his movements stiff. He looked at Ash, and for the first time, there was no sneer, no arrogance in his eyes. Only a deep, profound, and unsettling confusion. That, he started, his voice barely a whisper. That wasn't a Pokémon battle, Ash. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the trees, leaving Ash alone with his victory and its terrifying implications. The adrenaline faded, and a wave of psychic and physical exhaustion crashed over Ash. He stumbled, catching himself on his knee. The brief connection, the sensory overload, had taken a toll. He felt as if he'd run a marathon in his own mind. Pikachu was immediately at his side, nudging his hand, chirping with concern. "I'm okay, buddy," Ash rasped, recalling Infernape with a surge of pride and gratitude. "We're okay." He looked over at the oak tree. Amara was still there, floating silently. But her posture had changed. Her arms were no longer crossed. Her hands were held slightly apart, as if weighing something invisible. Her amethyst eyes were fixed on him, but the clinical analysis was gone. It had been replaced by something else. Something new. A deep, piercing wonder. She had given him a window into his Pokémon's soul, and in return, he had given her a glimpse into the chaotic, illogical, and overwhelmingly powerful nature of a true bond. She said nothing, her silence more profound than any of her previous analyses. She was processing, re-evaluating, and for the first time, her directive was not the only thing on her mind. On a distant, sun-scorched ridge overlooking the meadow, a figure lowered a pair of high-tech binoculars. The cloaked Aegis Scion, Commander Valerius, stood motionless, her face a mask of cold professionalism. She had recorded everything. The battle, the strategy, the impossible final move. She tapped a comms unit embedded in her wrist. "Commander Valerius reporting to Grand Master." "Report," Silas's voice came back, crisp and disembodied. "Observation complete. Paul of Veilstone City engaged the targets in a full-scale battle. The monarch's conventional strategies were dismantled. He was strategically outmaneuvered at every turn." "And the outcome?" Silas asked, a hint of anticipation in his voice. "The monarch won," Valerius stated, her tone flat. In the final moments, the entity established a direct psychic link. Not to augment power, but to share sensory information. The result was, a tactical singularity. A move of impossible precision that reversed a guaranteed loss. Their synergy is not just additive, it's adaptive and exponential. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Silas was absorbing the information, his brilliant mind processing the new, dangerous variable. "I see," Silas said finally, his voice colder than before. "Their bond is evolving faster than anticipated. Conventional engagement is no longer an option. It would be like trying to fight a storm with a sword." He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice held a new, chilling finality. "Commander, your observations are complete. Return to base. It's time to introduce ourselves to the world." He gave the order that would set the next phase of his plan into motion, an order that would turn a private conflict into a public crisis. Prepare the stasis field. Chapter 3, The Gilded Cage. The air in the Lumiose conference hall was as polished and suffocating as the marble floors. It was a cavernous amphitheater, designed to project power, with tiers of velvet-cushioned seats rising into the shadows beneath a vast, stained-glass dome. The dome depicted the legends of Kalos, Xerneas, Yveltal, and Zygarde, their forms rendered in 1,000 shards of colored light, a permanent reminder of the forces that lay just beyond the world's fragile order. Today, those silent glass figures seemed less like history and more like a warning. Every seat was filled. The delegates of the World Pokémon League Congress, a sea of dark suits and anxious faces, stared down at the circular stage in the center. They were not alone. Dotted amongst them, radiating an authority that no politician could muster, were the champions. Stephen Stone of Hoenn, his silver hair catching the light, his expression one of cool, geological calm. Lance, the Kanto and Johto champion, stood with his arms crossed, his cape a slash of dramatic black, his face a thunderous mask of suspicion. And beside him, a stark contrast, was Cynthia. The Sinnoh champion sat with a thoughtful poise, her long blonde hair obscuring one eye, her gaze not accusatory, but intensely, unnervingly curious. Into this crucible of fear and judgment, Ash Ketchum walked. He moved with a quiet confidence that belied the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. His stride was even, his shoulders relaxed. Pikachu was not on his shoulder but walking beside him, a tiny, defiant soldier, his posture mirroring his partner's calm. And behind them, a silent, graceful phantom, came Amara. She floated a foot off the ground, her pearlescent skin seeming to absorb and soften the hall's harsh lighting. Her amethyst eyes were not fixed on the crowd, but on the back of Ash's head, a silent, unwavering focus. Her very presence was a psychic pressure, a low hum at the edge of hearing that made the air feel thick and heavy. A collective, indrawn breath followed them to the center of the stage. There were no chairs for them. They were defendants in a trial that had not yet been declared. Lance was the first to break the silence. His voice, trained to command dragons and sway nations, boomed through the hall's perfect acoustics. Ash Ketchum. You were summoned to answer for this, entity. He gestured toward Amara, his hand dismissing her as one might a stray weather pattern. The energy signatures emanating from your location on Mount Quina were catastrophic. You stand here today with a being whose power rivals that of the monstrosity that destroyed the Cinnabar Gym. We demand an explanation. Ash met the Dragon Master's fiery gaze without flinching. Her name is Amara, he said, his voice even and clear, carrying an authority of its own. It was not the authority of a king, but of a man unshakably certain of his truth. She's not an entity or a thing. She's my partner. A partner? Lance's laugh was a short, harsh bark. A partner you met 6 weeks ago? A being of unknown origin and incalculable destructive potential? Do not be naive, boy. Your sentimentality has always been your greatest weakness, but this time it may endanger the world. Before Ash could respond, Stephen Stone leaned forward, his voice as smooth and hard as polished agate. The issue, Lance, is not just one of power, but of precedent. This Amara is a second Mewtwo. A bioengineered legendary. We have protocols for wild legendaries. We have no framework for manufactured gods. What is its purpose? Who created it? And what, precisely, is the nature of this partnership? The questions hung in the air, clinical and sharp. This was an interrogation, a vivisection of his bond. Her purpose, Ash began, turning to address the entire hall, is to understand. And the nature of our partnership is the same as the one I have with Pikachu, or Charizard, or any of my Pokémon. It's built on trust. A portly man in the front row, Chairman Prescott of the Oversight Committee, slammed his hand on his desk. Trust? This is not a child's game, Monarch Ketchum. This creature could level this city with a thought. Your trust is irrelevant in the face of such a threat. We must contain it, study it. A sudden, intense cold swept through the hall. Prescott stopped mid-sentence, his face paling. He clutched his temples, a flicker of raw panic in his eyes as a phantom migraine, sharp as a needle of ice, stabbed behind his vision for a single, terrifying instant. It was gone as quickly as it came, but the message had been delivered. Across the hall, others shifted uncomfortably, feeling a cold draft that had no source. Amara had not moved. Her expression had not changed. But her psychic presence, which had been a low hum, had for a moment become a clear, cold note of warning. Do not threaten him. The silence that followed was thick with a new, more personal fear. Cynthia chose this moment to speak, her voice cutting through the tension like a clear bell. Ash, she said, her gaze analytical but not unkind. When you and Infernape fought Paul, witnesses described a moment of impossible synchronicity. They said it was as if you were one being. Was that Amara's power? Ash looked at Cynthia, grateful for a question that sought understanding rather than condemnation. I asked her to show me what Infernape was feeling. She did. I saw what he saw. Felt what he felt. The choice was still mine. The will was still his. You shared consciousness, Cynthia murmured, her eyes widening slightly. She wasn't looking at Amara as a weapon anymore, but as a key to an entirely new field of study. The implications of that are staggering. They are dangerous. Lance boomed, reclaiming the floor. A power that blurs the line between man and Pokemon is an abomination. An affront to the natural order. The hall devolved into a cacophony of frightened, angry shouts. The delegates were in a panic, their fear of the unknown stoked by Lance's rhetoric. They were a mob, and Ash was the target. It was into this chaos that a new voice spoke, calm and resonant, cutting through the noise with effortless command. Perhaps what we need is not more fear, but a dose of reason. All heads turned. Walking down the central aisle of the amphitheater was a man in a simple, impeccably tailored black suit. He was tall and moved with a serene confidence, his silver-streaked hair lending him an air of gravitas. The guards made no move to stop him. Chairman Prescott was already on his feet, his expression one of profound relief. "Grand Master Silas," Prescott announced. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. The Congress has invited the head of the Aegis Order to act as an expert consultant on legendary-level threats." Silas reached the stage, giving a respectful nod to the champions before turning his full attention to Ash. He smiled, a warm, disarming expression that did not quite reach his eyes. "Ash Ketchum," Silas said, his voice rich with sincerity. "It's an honor. I've followed your career for years. Your victory over Leon was a masterclass in strategy and heart. I count myself as one of your greatest admirers." Ash was taken aback by the greeting. He felt Pikachu tense beside him. He gave a slight, cautious nod in return. However, Silas continued, his tone shifting to one of gentle concern as he addressed the hall, "I understand the fear present in this room. Power of this magnitude, without context or control, is terrifying." He turned to Amara, his gaze analytical but not hostile. "A truly magnificent being. A testament to the frightening power of modern genetics." He gestured to the air in front of him, and a technician in the control booth activated a holographic projector. A massive, three-dimensional image flickered to life above the stage. "The Aegis Order was founded on a simple principle," Silas explained, his voice narrating the images that began to play. "That the mortal world deserves a shield against the cosmic carelessness of god-level powers." The first image showed a familiar scene, a berserk Zapdos, wreathed in a thunderstorm of its own making, descending on a power plant. The footage was chaotic, filmed from a shaking camera. Then, the Aegis Order's involvement began. Sleek, white aircraft appeared. They didn't fire missiles. They deployed a series of pylons that shot beams of serene, blue light, forming a dome over the legendary bird. "We do not seek to destroy," Silas said, as the hologram showed the raging Zapdos inside the blue dome slowly calm, its lightning dissipating. It eventually landed, looking confused but unharmed. "We seek to contain. To neutralize. Our stasis fields pacify legendary-level entities, allowing them to be relocated to habitats where they pose no threat to human populations." The hologram shifted. A colossal tidal wave, with the unmistakable silhouette of a furious Kyogre at its heart, was bearing down on a coastal city. The Aegis Order's ships deployed a network of sonic buoys. The wave didn't crash, it simply dispersed. The water flattened, the rage in the ocean stilled. It was clean. It was efficient. There was no violence, no destruction. It was the perfect, sanitized solution. The politicians were mesmerized. A murmur of approval and relief spread through the delegates. Here was the answer. A strong, competent hand to manage the chaos. Silas let the images sink in before turning back to Ash. His expression was one of earnest appeal. "Your bond, Ash, is unprecedented. It is a beautiful, dangerous miracle. But you are one man. You cannot be everywhere at once. And what happens if you lose control? What happens if Amara's logic deems humanity a threat to be eliminated? The world cannot afford to take that chance." He took a step closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, tempting offer. "Join us. Help us. With your intuitive understanding in our resources, we can create a new paradigm. You and Amara could be the bridge, guiding our hand, helping us regulate and understand these powers. We can give you legitimacy. A place in the world. A way to turn this threat into an accepted, controlled asset. It was the perfect trap. An offer of everything Ash could want, acceptance for Amara, a role in protecting the world, an end to the fear. He could see the appeal. He could feel the logic of it. But Ash's empathy had been honed on 1,000 battlefields and in 1,000 quiet moments. He didn't just hear Silas's words, he felt what was behind them. He felt the cold, clinical emptiness of the stasis field. He looked at the hologram of the pacified Zapdos and didn't see a calmed creature. He saw a caged one. He felt the silence where its roaring spirit should have been. He looked Silas directly in the eye. The warmth in the man's face was a carefully constructed mask, and for the first time, Ash saw the glacial chill underneath. What happened to the Zapdos after you relocated it? Ash asked, his voice quiet. Silas blinked, momentarily surprised by the question. It was moved to a secure, isolated habitat where its energy could be safely contained. You put it in a box, Ash stated, his voice hardening. You talk about shields, but that blue dome was a cage. You talk about dispersing a tidal wave, but you silenced a god. You don't want to regulate power, Silas. You want to erase it. The friendly mask on Silas's face finally began to crack. I want to protect innocent people from becoming collateral damage in the games of deities. There's no such thing as a clean solution to a problem like this. Ash shot back, his voice rising with a passion that commanded the attention of the entire hall. You show us these clean videos, but you don't show what comes next. You don't show the empty spirit of a Pokemon that's been cut off from the world. Power isn't a disease to be cured. It's a responsibility. And the moment you decide that no one can be trusted to handle that responsibility, you become the biggest threat of all. He took a step forward, his presence filling the stage. He was no longer a defendant. He was the accuser. I've met beings you would call gods. I've looked them in the eye. Some were angry, some were lonely, some were scared. But not a single one was a problem that could be solved by putting it in a cage. You see Amara as a weapon to be controlled. I see her as a partner to be trusted. That's the difference between us. The ideological battle lines had been drawn in fire. The hall was silent, the delegates caught between Ash's passionate idealism and Silas's cold pragmatism. Silas's expression was now devoid of all warmth. He had underestimated the monarch's perception. He had hoped to co-opt him, to turn the world's most beloved hero into a symbol for his own cause. That had failed. It was time for Plan B, a beautiful sentiment, Ketchum, Silas said, his voice a silken threat. But sentiment will not save you when your partner decides your trust is misplaced. You have made your position clear. He turned to the Congress. The Aegis Order stands ready to act when this partnership inevitably threatens global stability. The choice of what to do next is yours. With that, he turned and walked off the stage, his departure as commanding as his arrival. He had lost the debate, but he had won the war. He had planted a seed of terror and presented himself as the only harvest. Ash stood on the stage, the weight of the world's fear pressing down on him once more. He had held his ground, but he felt the political earth shifting beneath his feet. He was no longer just the world monarch. He was an outlaw, a heretic clinging to a belief and trust in a world that was rapidly choosing to embrace fear. As Silas walked down the long, marbled hallway outside the chamber, his public face of calm concern melted away, leaving a residue of cold, hard calculation. Commander Valerius, the scion from the meadow, emerged from an alcove, falling into step beside him. He refused, as you predicted, Grand Master, she said. He did more than refuse, Silas murmured, his gaze fixed on the ornate doors of the chamber. He declared his philosophy to the world. He has isolated himself. The League is paralyzed. They won't dare to defend him now, not after he so brazenly defied the offer of a peaceful solution. Silas stopped and turned to her, a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The final piece of the trap was about to spring. He believes this was a political battle. He believes he has time to win hearts and minds. A thin, cruel smile touched Silas's lips. It's time to show him, and the world, that this was never a debate. It's a war. And it's a war he just lost. He looked toward the grand glass ceiling of the Lumio station far in the distance, a jewel in the heart of the city. The trap is ready, Silas said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Spring it. Chapter 4, The Scions of Aegis. The sterile atmosphere of the Congress dissolved the moment Ash stepped outside. Lumio City greeted him with its usual, chaotic symphony, the rattle of the high-speed trams, the scent of fresh-baked bread from a nearby cafe, the murmur of 100 conversations blending into a vibrant, living whole. For a moment it was easy to forget the gilded cage he had just left, the cold judgment in Lance's eyes, the silken threat in Silas's voice. For a moment it was just another city, another adventure. Pikachu, sensing the shift in Ash's mood, leaped onto his shoulder and nudged his cheek, a small gesture of solidarity. Amara floated silently behind them, her amethyst eyes sweeping across the cityscape, cataloging the architecture, the flow of people, the myriad energies of a metropolis. The emotional density of this urban center is highly volatile, she observed in his mind. Fear, avarice, and anxiety exist in close proximity to joy, affection, and ambition. It is a chaotic and unstable system. It's called life, Amara, Ash said, a wry smile touching his lips as he navigated through the bustling plaza in front of Prism Tower. It's supposed to be a little messy. He was heading for the Pokémon Center. His team deserved a proper checkup after the brutal battle with Paul, and he needed a moment to think, to plan his next move. Silas had laid a political minefield, and Ash had just stomped right through the middle of it. He had allies. Cynthia's curious gaze had felt more like a promise than a judgment, but they were now politically isolated. As they passed a large public fountain, a child, no older than 5, pointed up at Amara, his eyes wide with wonder. "Mommy, look! Is that a new kind of Pokémon?" The mother quickly pulled the child away, her face a mask of fear, her eyes darting nervously towards them as if they were a live bomb. It was a small moment, but it was a sharp, painful reminder of the perception Silas was cultivating. They were not a trainer and his partner. They were a threat. It was then that the city's symphony hit a wrong note. It started not as a sound, but as a feeling. A deep, resonant hum that vibrated up through the soles of Ash's boots. It was the same oppressive frequency he'd felt on Mount Quina, but amplified, refined, and weaponized. The vibrant chatter of the plaza died. People stopped, looking around in confusion. The flock of Pidgey perched on the fountain suddenly scattered, squawking in panic. Then came the sound. A high-pitched, rising whine that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What is that?" Ash muttered, scanning the rooftops. Pikachu shrieked. It wasn't a cry of attack or defiance, but a sharp, pained sound. He clutched his head, his body trembling, his little red cheeks sparking erratically, painfully. "It is a multi-frequency field," Amara's voice came, tight with what Ash could only describe as alarm. "It is designed to agitate and disrupt the neural pathways specific to Pokémon. It is causing them extreme distress." Around them, the proof was immediate and heartbreaking. A woman's stylish furfur began barking and snarling at its owner's feet. A young boy's Pancham leaped from his arms and fled into the crowd. Every Pokémon in the plaza was suddenly in a state of panic and agony. Then, the pylons erupted. With the sound of tearing metal and shattering pavement, 5 colossal, crystalline structures burst from the ground around the plaza, forming a perfect pentagon. They were sleek, white, and pulsed with the same cold, blue light Ash had seen in Silas's holograms. The air inside the perimeter they created grew thick and heavy, shimmering like a heat haze. The stasis field. "It's a trap," Ash breathed, the words tasting like ash. Silas hadn't been waiting for the Congress's decision. He had been waiting for them to step outside. From the alleys and rooftops, figures descended. They wore stark white and gray armored bodysuits, their faces obscured by reflective visors. They moved with the silent, coordinated efficiency of a wolf pack. The scions of the Aegis Order. They carried rifles, not designed to fire bullets, but to project beams of shimmering, distorted energy, a void in the shape of light. One of the scions leveled her rifle, not at Ash, but at Pikachu. "Pikachu, look out!" Ash yelled. He moved to shield him, but he was too late. A beam of that terrible, silent energy struck Pikachu a glancing blow on his side. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Pikachu's pained cries were cut off as if a switch had been flipped. His body went limp. His cheeks, which had been sparking in distress, went dark. But the true horror was not what Ash saw, but what he felt. The bond, that constant, warm presence in the back of his mind that had been his companion since he was 10 years old, a connection more real and tangible than the ground beneath his feet, vanished. For one sickening, heart-stopping second, there was only silence. An absolute, terrifying void where Pikachu should have been. The world tilted on its axis. Raw, primal terror, cold and sharp, lanced through Ash's heart. The feeling returned a moment later, faint and flickering, like a distant candle in a hurricane. Pikachu shuddered, his eyes wide with a confusion and fear Ash had never seen in him. The null energy, as Silas's technology was called, hadn't just harmed him, it had tried to unmake him, to sever the very essence of his spirit. That single moment of silence galvanized Ash. Fear was burned away by a cold, incandescent rage. This was not a battle for philosophy anymore. This was a rescue. "Amara! Shield!" he roared. A dome of amethyst energy erupted around them, shimmering into existence a split second before a dozen more null beams converged on their position. The beams impacted the psychic shield with a sickening, sizzling sound, the energy of life and the energy of nothingness tearing at each other. The shield held, but Amara grunted, a flicker of pain crossing her features. "The null, it does not push. It erases. It is difficult to shield against something that is defined by absence." The lead scion, her movements fluid and predatory, stepped forward. It was Commander Valerius, her visor reflecting the chaos of the plaza. "Target 1 is Ash Ketchum. Target 2 is the entity. Our objective is separation and containment. Lethal force on the entity is authorized if necessary. The monarch is to be taken alive. Move." Her voice, amplified by her helmet, was cold and impersonal. The scions spread out, their tactics clear. They weren't trying to break the shield. They were trying to herd them, to force them into a crossfire. Civilians screamed and fled, adding to the chaos. Ash knelt, cradling the trembling Pikachu in his arms. "Pikachu, buddy, can you hear me? I'm right here." Pikachu looked up at him, his eyes unfocused, but a faint, desperate spark returned to his cheeks. Ash. The thought was weak, frayed, but it was there. "Stay with me," Ash whispered fiercely. He looked at Amara, his mind racing, processing the battlefield with a clarity born of pure adrenaline. Conventional fighting was a losing game. Their power was dampened. The enemy was numerous, disciplined, and their weapons were an existential threat. They couldn't overpower them. They had to outthink them. "Amara," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They think this is a battle between us and them. They're wrong." Her amethyst eyes met his. "Elaborate." "The stasis field is hurting every Pokémon in the city," he said, gesturing to the chaos outside their shield. "The scions are focused on us. They're ignoring everything else. We're not going to fight their soldiers." A flicker of understanding lit her eyes. "We are going to fight their battlefield." "Exactly," Ash confirmed. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against Pikachu's. He poured all his focus, all his will, into their bond, using it as an anchor. Amara, I need you to focus our power. Not on an attack. Not on a bigger shield. I need you to turn us into a broadcast tower. This was a new request, even more audacious than the one in the meadow. You wish to project your consciousness. The energy required would be immense. The stasis field will resist. Then we push through it, Ash said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. Don't show them my anger. Don't show them my power. Show them my courage. Share what I feel for Pikachu right now. Let every Pokemon in this city feel it. It was a gamble of epic proportions. To open himself up like that, to make his own spirit a beacon in a sea of psychic static. But it was the only move he had left. Amara stared at him for a long moment, seeing the desperation, the fury, and the unshakable love he felt for his partner. She saw the terror of that silent moment when his bond had been severed, and she understood. This was not strategy. This was a declaration of existence. Very well, she conceded, a newfound respect in her tone. Hold on. The amethyst shield around them began to pulse, not with defensive energy, but with a vibrant, outward radiating light. Ash became the focal point. Amara drew on his emotional core, the raw, unfiltered essence of his bond with Pikachu, and amplified it, shaping it into a psychic wave. It tore through the stasis field's oppressive frequency like a thunderclap. It was not a command. It was not a call to arms. It was a feeling. A shared sense of defiance. A promise that they were not alone in their pain. Across the city, the effect was immediate. The panicking Furfrou, which had been snarling at its owner, suddenly stopped. It looked up, its head cocked, and then pressed against its owner's leg, a low growl directed not at her, but at the white-armored scions in the distance. The fleeing Pancham skidded to a halt. Turned, and charged back, not at its trainer, but at the nearest stasis pylon, ramming its small body against the unyielding metal in a tiny act of furious defiance. On rooftops, flocks of Pidgey and Spearow stopped their panicked flight. They turned as one, their thousands of eyes fixing on the scions below. They descended, not in an attack, but as a wave of disruptive chaos. They swarmed the visors of the Aegis soldiers, their wings beating, their cries deafening. From every alley, every apartment window, every trainer's poke ball, the Pokemon of Lumio City rose up. A delivery man's Gogoat deliberately blocked a street, creating a traffic jam that cut off Aegis reinforcements. A wild Flebaby, tiny and insignificant, used Vine Whip to tangle the feet of a Scion, sending her sprawling. A trainer's Pyroar, held back by its owner, unleashed a deafening roar that wasn't aimed at an enemy, but was a contribution to the symphony of defiance, adding its voice to Ash's psychic call. It was chaos. It was messy. It was beautiful. Valerius watched, her cold composure finally cracking. What is this? What are they doing? Her soldiers, trained for precise, military engagements, were being overwhelmed by a city's worth of civilian interference. Their non-lethal tactics were useless against 1,000 tiny acts of rebellion. Amara, witnessing the symphony of loyalty that Ash had orchestrated, was transfixed. This was a power she had never conceived of. Not the raw force of a god, but the unified will of the small, the loyal, the brave. It was a power multiplier beyond any calculation. It's working, Ash gritted out, the effort of maintaining the psychic broadcast causing sweat to bead on his forehead. The central pylon. It has to be Prism Tower. We need to get there. The area will be heavily fortified, Amara stated, her shield flickering as she diverted more energy to the broadcast. We'll have help, Ash said, a fierce grin on his face. He scooped up Pikachu, who was now conscious and alert, his cheeks sparking with defiant energy. Let's move. The amethyst shield dropped. As one, they sprinted from the fountain, a living storm of Pokemon clearing a path before them. A Scion took aim, but a trainer's Greninja, appearing from a rooftop, slapped the rifle aside with a water shuriken before melting back into the shadows. They were no longer alone. They fought their way through the streets, not with power, but with momentum. The city itself had become their ally. They reached the base of Prism Tower to find it heavily guarded. A squad of Saiyans stood before the main entrance, their rifles raised. Behind them, a massive pylon, the source of the stasis field, hummed with a terrifying energy. "There is no way through without a direct confrontation," Amara said, her body tense. "To destroy that pylon will require a significant expenditure of energy. The psychic backlash in this confined space could be catastrophic. Collateral damage is a certainty." She was ready to do it. For Ash, she would accept that price. But Ash looked at the civilians cowering behind locked doors, at the trainers trying to calm their Pokémon, and he shook his head. "No. There's always another way." He looked at the pylon, not at its armored shell, but at its base, where a series of thick, armored power conduits snaked into the tower's infrastructure. He unclipped a pokeball from his belt. "Sceptile, I choose you." The forest Pokémon appeared in a flash, its yellow eyes immediately sizing up the situation. It felt the oppressive field, saw the enemy, and looked to Ash, its razor-sharp leaf blades quivering with readiness. "Amara, give me a diversion. Just for a second." Ash yelled. Amara needed no further instruction. She raised her hands and a blinding wave of pure psychic light, harmless but utterly disorienting, washed over the Saiyans. For a crucial 2 seconds, they were blinded, their targeting systems scrambled. "Sceptile, now. The conduits at the base. Use leaf blade, but be precise. Cut them clean." Sceptile became a blur of green. It moved with impossible speed, a living razor wind. It didn't attack the pylon itself. It didn't attack the soldiers. It flashed past them, and the sound of 3 sharp, distinct shinks cut through the air. Sceptile landed back beside Ash a second before the Saiyans recovered their vision. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the central pylon flickered. The deep, menacing hum died with a pathetic whine. The blue stasis field across the city dissolved into nothing. A collective sigh of relief, both human and Pokémon, swept through Lumiose. The oppressive pressure was gone. Pokémon everywhere calmed, their spirits no longer under assault. Valeria stared at the dead pylon, then at Ash, her visor unable to hide her utter disbelief. He hadn't met her force with force. He had diagnosed the system, rallied an army of incidental allies, and performed a surgical strike that disabled her entire network without causing a single casualty. "Fall back," she ordered into her comms, her voice tight with a fury that was all the more potent for its control. Mission failed. Retreat to designated rally points. The Saiyans melted back into the alleys, their retreat as swift and disciplined as their attack. They left behind a city shaken, but a people awakened. Ash had been branded a threat, but in the heart of Lumiose, he had just proven himself a savior. Ash knelt and put a hand on Sceptile's shoulder. "Incredible work, Sceptile. Thank you." Sceptile gave a curt, proud nod. He stood up, recalling his Pokémon, his body aching with exhaustion. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep bone weariness in its wake. They had won. They had escaped. But it was a hollow victory. He looked at the faces of the people emerging from the shops and homes. The fear of Amara was gone, replaced by a mixture of awe, gratitude, and confusion. But Ash knew this was just the beginning. The Aegis Order had shown its hand. They were not a political body to be debated. They were a technologically advanced, fanatically driven army. And they would not stop. He met Amara's gaze. The battle had forged a new level of respect between them. She had seen the power of his messy, illogical, beautiful way of life. And he had seen the terrifying, absolute nature of the enemy they now faced together. They'll be back, Ash said, his voice quiet. Yes, Amara confirmed. They will adapt. They will be more prepared. They will not make the same mistakes. He looked up at the sky, now clear and blue again, as if the nightmare had never happened. Then we need to be ready. We need allies. Not ones of chance, but ones who understand what's at stake. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, where they had to go next. They needed power, yes, but more than that, they needed wisdom. They needed allies who understood the balance of the world on a scale that men like Silas could never comprehend. They needed the legends. Chapter 5, A Council of Legends. The escape from Lumios was a blur of shadows and back alleys. They moved under the cloak of the chaos they had helped create, leaving the city before the League's bewildered authorities could even formulate a response. Ash knew that every official channel, every Pokémon Center, every airport, was now a potential trap. They were fugitives, their crime not one of action, but of existence. Days later, they stood on a windswept cliff overlooking the sea. The salt spray misted Ash's face, a clean, sharp scent that felt worlds away from the cloying fear of the Congress Hall. Pikachu, fully recovered but now carrying a new, watchful tension, sat on his shoulder. Amara floated beside him, her silence a comfortable, shared space between them. The battle in Lumios had changed things. Her analytical observations had been tempered with a quiet respect. She had witnessed a power she couldn't quantify, the strength of a city's collective heart, and it had profoundly altered her calculations. Obliterating their command structure would be the most logical next step, Amara stated, her mental voice calm but carrying a new, dangerous edge. The attack on Pikachu had recalibrated her understanding of threat. I have analyzed global communication networks. The Aegis Order has 3 primary command hubs. I can locate them. We could cripple them before they realize we are coming. It was a tempting offer. A swift, surgical strike. Justice for the terror in the plaza. But Ash shook his head, his gaze fixed on the horizon. And what happens then, Amara? He asked softly. We become them. We start believing that our power gives us the right to be judge, jury, and executioner. We prove Silas right. He turned to her, his eyes earnest. I won't do it. We can't win this by becoming monsters to fight a monster. Your moral constraints are a tactical liability, she countered, though her argument lacked its previous conviction. They're the only thing that makes the fight worthwhile, he replied. Silas and his null energy, this isn't just a threat to us. It's a threat to all Pokémon. We need allies who understand that. Allies who have more at stake than any human politician. He had a destination in mind. A place of myth. A place of beginning. Their journey became a pilgrimage. They traveled on foot, by sea on the back of a willing Lapras Ash had befriended years ago, and in the air under the silent, powerful flight of his Charizard. They sought out the hidden places of the world, the nexuses of ancient power where the boundaries between the mundane and the divine grew thin. Their first stop was a vast, sprawling canyon in the heart of Kanto, a maze of towering rock formations that resembled a petrified forest. At its center, glowing with a soft, ethereal light, stood the Tree of Beginning. As they approached, a shimmering, pink bubble of energy zipped through the air, circling them with playful curiosity. It darted towards Pikachu, who batted at it with a cheerful chirp. Mew. The mythical Pokémon materialized before them, its large blue eyes filled with an ancient innocence. It tilted its head, looking from Ash, whom it recognized, to Amara, whom it regarded with profound fascination. Another one? Mew's telepathic voice was not like Amara's clear, structured thought. It was a cascade of feelings, images, and playful squeaks. It saw Amara and felt an echo of its own DNA, but twisted, reformed, and imbued with a stark, lonely purpose. You feel so quiet inside. So loud, but so quiet. Amara seemed taken aback by the observation. She, who could analyze the deepest secrets of the human mind, was being read like a child's picture book. "I am Amara," she projected, her tone stiff. "My purpose is to find a friend." Mew interrupted, zipping around her head. "You were lonely. So you looked for the one with the warmest heart." "Him." It did a happy little flip in front of Ash. "He gives the best head scratches." Ash couldn't help but smile. "It's good to see you too, Mew. We need your help. There's a man, Silas," he explained everything. The Aegis Order, the stasis fields, the horrifying silence of the null energy. As he spoke, Mew's playful demeanor faded. It floated before him, its expression growing serious. It reached out a tiny paw and touched the spot on Pikachu's side where the null beam had struck. It felt the lingering scar on his spirit, the faint echo of non-existence. Mew recoiled, its body trembling, its psychic voice a sudden, sharp cry of fear and disgust. "The quiet. It's the empty quiet. Bad. Wrong." Mew communicated not in words, but in pure concept. It showed them a vision, the vibrant, interconnected life force of the world, a tapestry of a billion glowing threads. Then it showed them the null, a creeping, silent unraveling. A hole in the tapestry. A wrongness that didn't destroy life, but simply, unwas it. Mew, a being of pure life and creation, felt its presence as a fundamental violation of reality itself. It looked from Ash to Amara, its fear giving way to a new understanding. It saw their bond, the way Ash's warmth and Amara's power intertwined. It saw them not as two separate beings, but as a potential answer to the quiet. With a resolute squeak, Mew zipped away, disappearing into the heart of the tree of beginning to spread the word. They had their first, and perhaps most important, ally. From there, they traveled to the Whirl Islands, a cluster of storm-racked isles shrouded in perpetual mist. In the deep, underwater trenches between the islands, they sought the guardian of the seas. Ash sent out a call, not with psychic power, but with the pure, resonant harmony of a heart that wished no harm, a call he had learned long ago. From the abyssal depths, a shape arose. Lugia, vast and majestic, breached the surface in a spray of silver water, its powerful wings calming the turbulent sea around them. Its ancient eyes, filled with the wisdom of the deep, fixed on them. "You," Lugia's voice was a deep, sonorous echo, resonating in their very bones. "The chosen one. You walk a strange path, bringing a shadow in your wake." Its gaze fell upon Amara, and a deep, guttural growl rumbled in its chest. "This one, it is an echo of a storm I once calmed. Its power is an affront. It is a song played out of key with the world's music." Lugia's distrust was a palpable force, a pressure that made the air heavy. It saw Amara as another unnatural disaster, an imbalance waiting to happen. "She is not a storm," Ash said, his voice firm and unwavering as he stood on the shore. "She is with me. And we are here to warn you. The Aegis Order, and their null energy, it's a threat to everything. It can silence the song of the world forever." Lugia listened, its massive head tilted. It had felt the subtle shift, a quiet fading in the life hymn of the ocean. It had dismissed it as a passing anomaly. Now, it understood. The threat was real. But its suspicion of Amara remained. "I will aid you against the silent ones," Lugia declared. "Their weapon is a blight upon the sea and sky. But I will be watching your shadow partner. The moment her power threatens the balance, my judgment will be swift." It was a conditional alliance, forged in shared threat rather than trust, but it was enough. Lugia gave a great cry, a promise that echoed across the waves, and then descended back into the deep. The journey tested more than their ability to persuade gods. It tested them. The long days of travel and quiet nights spent under the stars stripped away the formalities of their early acquaintance. They were partners in a desperate mission, and in the quiet moments between worlds, they began to truly see each other. One night, They made camp in a hidden grotto behind a waterfall, its entrance shielded by a curtain of cascading water. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of wet stone and moss. A small fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the grotto walls. Pikachu was asleep, curled in a tight ball at the foot of Ash's sleeping bag. Ash was staring into the flames, his mind replaying the moment the null had hit Pikachu. The silence. The cold, gut-wrenching terror of that empty space in his soul. He shuddered, a tremor that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Amara, floating near the grotto's ceiling, sensed his distress. She descended, her amethyst glow a soft counterpoint to the firelight. "You are reliving the moment of disconnection," she stated. It wasn't a question. Ash didn't look at her. He just nodded, his throat tight. "I've faced down angry gods, Amara. I've been turned to stone. I've seen the world on the brink of ending a dozen times. But I have never, ever felt fear like that." It was, he struggled for the word, the silence. The thought of him just, not being there anymore. Not gone. Just, empty. He finally looked up at her, his eyes vulnerable. "That's what I'm most afraid of. Not losing a battle. Not even dying. But that silence. Losing them." Her analytical mind, which had always sought to categorize his emotions as strategic variables, was stilled by the raw, unguarded honesty of his confession. For the first time, she felt an echo of his fear, a concept her logical mind struggled to process. Fear was an irrational response to a perceived threat. But this was different. This was a fear of loss, of severance. In that moment, she made an illogical, inefficient choice. She decided to share. "The state you describe is the closest experiential analog to my own existence prior to our meeting," she projected, her mental voice softer than he had ever heard it. An image bloomed in his mind, not a vision forced upon him, but an offering. He saw a sterile white laboratory. He saw his own reflection in a glass tube, a small, fetal form floating in bubbling, nutrient-rich fluid. He felt the cold, dispassionate observation of the scientists, their minds full of data and ambition, but empty of warmth. He experienced the loneliness of a consciousness awakening into a world of pure information, a being of infinite power with no one to share it with, guided only by a single, cold directive: find the optimal partner. He felt the crushing, absolute solitude. The vision faded, leaving Ash breathless. He saw her now not as a magnificent, godlike being, but as a child who had been born into an empty room. "You were alone," he whispered, the words filled with a dawning, profound empathy. "I was an instrument designed for a purpose," she corrected, but the words were a shield she had used for so long they were beginning to wear thin. "Loneliness is an illogical emotional state. I was, unpartnered." Ash stood up and, without thinking, did what he always did when he encountered a being in pain. He reached out. He gently placed his hand on her arm. Her skin was smooth and cool, but a subtle warmth radiated from her core. At his touch, she flinched, not in fear, but in sheer surprise. No one had ever touched her. The scientists had handled her with magnetic fields and robotic arms. Her existence had been one of complete physical isolation. His touch was the first direct, physical contact she had ever known from another living being. A jolt of energy, warm and bright, passed between them. It was his empathy, his honesty, his simple, uncomplicated warmth, meeting her vast, lonely power. "Your illogical emotional state," she began, her mental voice wavering for the first time. "I cannot compute it. But I find myself compelled to protect it above all other mission parameters." The unspoken confession hung in the air between them, more powerful than any declaration she had ever made. Her claim on him, once a logical, predatory act, was being reshaped by the messy, inefficient, beautiful reality of connection. It was in this moment of fragile intimacy that a new presence made itself known. A figure stepped through the curtain of water at the grotto's entrance, as silent as a Jengar. Ash and Amara instantly broke apart, their postures shifting to defensive readiness. The firelight glinted off the newcomer's long, blonde hair and cast her face in shadow, but her silhouette was unmistakable. "That was quite a show you put on in Lumio City," Cynthia said, her voice calm and measured. She held up her hands to show she was no threat. Her Garchomp stood just behind her, a massive, powerful shape in the darkness. "You've made some very powerful people very angry." "Cynthia," Ash breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. "How did you find us?" "You may be good at disappearing," she said with a small smile, stepping into the light. "But I'm good at research. I didn't follow you. I predicted where you would go. You've always sought answers from the source. The tree of beginning was my first guess. I was only a day behind you." She looked from Ash to Amara, her sharp eyes missing nothing of the lingering tension between them. "The League is in chaos," she reported, her tone becoming serious. "Lance is pushing for your capture. The politicians are terrified of Silas, but more terrified of you. They are paralyzed. They're choosing the devil they think they can control over the god they can't. So you're here to bring us in?" Ash asked, his hand inching towards a poke ball on his belt. "No," Cynthia said firmly. "I'm here because I agree with you. I've studied the Aegis Order's public reports for years. They speak of peace, but their methods lead to silence. A world without the chaos of legendary Pokémon may be safer, but it would also be a world without wonder, a world diminished. Silas isn't a savior, he's a librarian who wants to lock away all the books." She stepped forward, her expression resolute. "I cannot openly defy the League. Not yet. But I will not stand by and let Silas turn the world into a gilded cage. I have resources. Intelligence. My network can tell you where the Aegis Order is moving, what they're planning. I can be your eyes and ears while you rally your unconventional allies." She had broken ranks. The Sinnoh champion, renowned for her wisdom and power, had chosen a side. Her strategic acumen would be a significant asset, Amara noted, her analysis of Cynthia immediate and positive. "She operates on a level of intellectual foresight that surpasses any other human I have observed." Ash felt a surge of hope, the first real, undiluted hope he'd felt since Lumios. They were no longer just two fugitives against the world. They had a team. "Thank you, Cynthia," he said, the words carrying the full weight of his gratitude. "We'll need it." Cynthia nodded, pulling a small, encrypted data chip from her pocket. "This is what my sources have gathered so far. Aegis movements, supply lines, and one thing that worries me." She handed the chip to Ash. "Silas has not tried to find you. All of his elite units, his scions, are being mobilized away from your last known locations. They're all converging on a single, remote target." "Where?" Ash asked. Cynthia's face was grim. "A newly unearthed temple in the Crown Tundra. Archaeologists were calling it the Temple of Hibernal Silence. Local legends say it's the prison of a great power, a place where something was sealed away. Silas isn't hunting you, Ash. He's hunting for a weapon." Far to the north, in the frozen, blizzard-swept expanse of the Crown Tundra, the Aegis Order moved with chilling efficiency. Floodlights bleached the ancient, snow-covered temple, their harsh glare defying the perpetual twilight. Hovercraft hummed, their engines muffled by the thick snowfall, as technicians in thermal gear set up a perimeter of scientific equipment. Commander Valerius stood before a massive, sealed door of carved ice and stone. The air here was so cold it felt thin, brittle. Her breath plumed in a white cloud. "Report," she said into her comms, her voice flat. The resonant frequencies matched the Grand Master's projections. "Commander," a technician replied over the link. "The energy signature within is dormant, but its potential is off the scale. It's absorbing ambient energy from our equipment." Valerius looked at the glyphs carved around the door. They depicted ancient humans, not fighting a Pokémon, but cowering from a formless, shapeless, nothing. An absence that seemed to consume the light around it. Silas was right, she murmured to herself. This was the source. The original sin. The first no. Our orders, Commander, the technician asked. Valerius's gaze was fixed on the center of the door, where a complex locking mechanism pulsed with a faint, internal light. Grand Master Silas has provided the sequence. He called it the dormant heart. Our objective is to retrieve it, intact. She gave the order, her voice echoing in the unnatural silence of the tundra. Begin the extraction. Chapter 6, The Hero's Shadow. The data chip from Cynthia was a map to the enemy's heart. It laid bare the Aegis Order's nervous system, supply routes, communication relays, and hidden bases disguised as weather stations or corporate research labs. Staring at the glowing holographic map projected from the device, Ash felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Silas's reach was global, his organization woven into the very fabric of the modern world. He's overextended, Ash murmured, tracing a finger along a glowing supply line that snaked through the mountains of the Galar region. All his best troops are in the Crown Tundra. His research facilities are at minimal staff. They were in a deep, hidden cave system Cynthia had secured for them, the air damp and smelling of ancient earth. A shaft of moonlight from a fissure high above illuminated the holographic display. An opportunity for a decapitation strike, Amara's voice echoed in his mind. She floated beside him, her amethyst eyes analyzing the data with frightening speed. Cynthia's intelligence indicates their primary research and development facility is located here. A point on the Galar map glowed brighter. A remote sector northeast of Winden, disguised as a macroagriculture company. Eden Innovations. Their stated purpose is developing sustainable Pokemon food sources. A logical fallacy. The energy consumption of the facility is consistent with high-yield particle acceleration, not food production. Protocol Chimera, Ash said, the name from Cynthia's report tasting like poison. Whatever Silas is building, that's where it's happening. He looked at Amara, his expression hardening. We can't let him get the weapon from the tundra. But we also can't let him finish the one he's building in Galar. We have to split his focus. We have to hit him where he's vulnerable. A surgical strike, Amara agreed. A logical and necessary course of action. We will dismantle his primary weapon before he can acquire a new one. The decision was made. Using Charizard for swift, high-altitude travel under the cover of night, they crossed the sea to Galar. They landed in a desolate stretch of the wild area, miles from the Eden Innovations facility. The place was a monument to corporate sterility, a series of colossal, white biodomes that gleamed under the moon, surrounded by a perimeter of high-tech fencing. It looked clean, sterile, and deeply wrong. Infiltration was surprisingly easy. Amara, with a flicker of psychic energy, created a momentary ghost in the security system's looping feed, allowing Ash and Pikachu to slip through the fence unseen. Inside, the corridors were white, silent, and smelled of antiseptic. It felt less like a research lab and more like a mausoleum. The silence was the most unnerving part. A facility dedicated to Pokemon food should have been filled with the sounds of Pokemon. There were none. They found the main lab in the facility's lowest sublevel. The door hissed open to reveal a scene from a nightmare. The room was vast, circular, and filled with dozens of large, cylindrical glass tanks. But instead of growing strange new plants, the tanks held Pokemon. A Machamp, its 4 powerful arms clamped in humming metal braces, its eyes vacant and dull. A Boltund, its sleek body covered in glowing cybernetic implants, its legs twitching with involuntary electrical spasms. In the center of the room was the worst of it, a Charizard, its wings fused with black, metallic alloys, its noble head encased in a visored helmet. Its iconic flame was gone, replaced by a flickering, sickly green light that pulsed in time with the machinery it was tethered to. They weren't just Pokemon. They were specimens. Living components in a horrific machine. What is this? Ash whispered, his voice thick with revulsion. Pikachu let out a low, angry growl. This, a calm voice said from the lab's upper catwalk, is salvation. A man in a white lab coat stepped into the light. He was older, with kind eyes and a grandfatherly face that Ash recognized instantly. Professor Alden. Ash breathed, stunned. You were a colleague of Professor Oak. You lectured on Pokémon conservation. I did, Professor Alden said, his voice laced with a sad, weary resignation. He gestured to the horrifying scene below. And I saw the truth, Ash. Pokémon are beautiful, powerful, and chaotic. They are living, breathing natural disasters. We love them, and so we forgive them when a stray hyper beam destroys a home, or a territorial dispute between two Gyarados swamps a village. We accept the cost. But I am no longer willing to. His cerebral activity indicates complete ideological conversion, Amara sent to Ash. He is a true believer in Silas's doctrine. Silas showed me a better way, Alden continued, his voice gaining a feverish intensity. Control. Order. Protocol Chimera is not about creating weapons. It's about creating stability. By fusing null tech with Pokémon biology, we can remove the chaos. We can program them. Create perfect, obedient guardians that possess all of their strength but none of their unpredictable, emotional volatility. You're mutilating them, Ash snarled, his hand tightening into a fist. You're taking their spirits, their very souls, and throwing them away. Souls are a sentimental fiction, Ash, Alden said, shaking his head sadly. I had hoped you, of all people, would understand the necessity. But Silas predicted your emotional response. As he spoke the words, a low hum filled the room. Shimmering blue energy fields snapped into existence, sealing the exits. The lab door slammed shut. From the walls, emitters extended, bathing the room in a pale, disorienting light. It wasn't the full stasis field, but a localized psychic dampener. Ash felt Amara's presence in his mind suddenly grow distant, muffled, as if she were shouting to him from across a vast chasm. Ash. It's a psychic vacuum. It's drawing my energy, isolating us. A heavy, reinforced glass wall descended from the ceiling, slamming down between them, trapping Amara on one side of the lab and Ash and Pikachu on the other. It was a trap, and they had walked right into it. Do not worry, Ash, Alden said, his voice echoing from a speaker. The Grand Master wishes to speak with you. He is most eager to make you understand. A section of the far wall slid away, revealing a dark, opulent chamber. From the shadows, Silas emerged. He was not wearing a suit, but a simple, dark tunic, as if preparing for a ceremony. He looked at Ash not with anger, but with a profound, almost paternal disappointment. I am truly sorry it has to be this way, Ash, Silas said, his voice resonating with a strange sympathy. I offered you a place at my side. A chance to guide the world towards a peaceful, orderly future. Your peace is a prison, Silas. Ash shot back, his eyes darting around the room, looking for any weakness, any escape. Pikachu was on high alert, cheeks sparking defiantly against the dampening field. Silas sighed. You see cages. I see shelter. You see a loss of freedom. I see an end to fear. He gestured to the air, and a hologram, far more personal than the ones he'd shown at the Congress, flickered to life between them. It showed a vibrant, sun-drenched city by the sea. A younger Silas, his face unlined by grief, was laughing, holding a little girl with bright red ribbons in her hair on his shoulders. A woman who could only be his wife stood beside him, her hand on his arm, her smile radiant. It was a perfect, idyllic scene of family and happiness. I loved Pokémon, Ash, Silas said, his voice growing thick with a grief that felt as fresh as if it were yesterday. I was a Pokémon ranger. My daughter, Lily, her first word was Pikachu. We lived in a city that celebrated the bond between humans and Pokémon more than any other. The scene in the hologram shifted. The sky turned dark. The camera, a handheld recording, was shaking. In the distance, over the sea, two colossal shapes were locked in combat. The crimson light of Groudon and the sapphire glow of Kyogre. Primal forces of nature, tearing the world apart in their ancient rage. They weren't evil, Silas whispered, his eyes fixed on the memory. They weren't malicious. They were simply fighting. And our city, our lives, our love, it was just in their way. The hologram showed the sea pulling back, then returning as a wave of impossible height, with Kyogre's furious form at its crest. It showed the ground splitting open as Groudon's power surged. It showed fire and water and chaos. The final image, before the recording cut to static, was of Silas, holding his daughter, as his wife screamed his name, just before the world was washed away. The hologram vanished, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the lab. I loved them, Silas repeated, his voice a broken whisper, until I saw what their divine carelessness costs us. The price for their freedom is our extinction. The world needs a shepherd with a strong crook, Ash. One with the strength to protect the flock not just from wolves, but from the gods themselves. He looked at Ash, his eyes burning with the conviction of a zealot. Protocol Chimera is not just about the Pokémon. It is the final step of my own apotheosis. The null energy you fear, the dormant heart my scions are retrieving from the tundra, it is not a weapon. It is a catalyst. I will merge with it. I will become a being capable of imposing absolute, unwavering order on every legendary Pokémon on this planet. I will become the shield humanity has always needed. He saw it as a noble sacrifice. To become a monster to cage all other monsters. To become a god to dethrone all other gods. While Silas delivered his tragic manifesto, Amara was not idle. Trapped behind the psychic-proof glass, she felt her connection to Ash, her primary source of emotional grounding, stretched thin and tenuous. The dampening field was a constant drain, pulling at her power, trying to dissolve her consciousness into placid inertia. For the first time since her awakening, she felt a flicker of something she could only identify as panic. Her directive, her logic, her very being was tied to him. To be separated was to be crippled. No. The thought was her own, sharp and defiant. She had been created to be a partner, but she was not a parasite. Before Ash, there was Amara. A being of immense power and cold, hard logic. She had allowed his influence to soften her, to teach her, but she had not forgotten what she was. She pressed her hand against the glass. It was not mere reinforced material, it was laced with a microweave of psychic-resistant alloys. Pushing through it would be like trying to punch through a mountain. Direct force was inefficient. Her amethyst eyes scanned her side of the lab. Wires. Conduits. Power relays for the dampening field. She traced them with her gaze, her mind processing the schematics at light speed. The system was a closed loop. It was designed to contain her. But every system has a flaw. Every circuit has a failure point. She focused her will. Not in a massive, explosive wave, but in a tiny, precise needle of psychic energy. She didn't target the glass. She targeted the primary power conduit 10 feet to her left. She didn't try to sever it. She simply, delicately, reversed its polarity for a fraction of a microsecond. It was the equivalent of flipping a single switch in a citywide power grid. For an instant, the entire system overloaded. The psychic dampening field sputtered. The emitters sparked and died. The blue energy field sealing the exits flickered and vanished. The psychic vacuum disappeared, and the full, vibrant presence of Ash and Pikachu slammed back into her consciousness. The relief was so profound, so overwhelming, that it almost brought her to her knees. It was an illogical, sentimental response. And she welcomed it. In the main chamber, the effect was immediate. Pikachu's cheeks, which had been struggling to produce a single spark, exploded with brilliant yellow electricity. Silas whirled around, his sermon interrupted, his face a mask of fury. Impossible. That chamber is, nothing's impossible when you have a partner you can count on, Ash said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. The time for talk was over. Pikachu, Volt Tackle. Full power. Pikachu became a comet of pure electricity, a living embodiment of Ash's rage and defiance. He didn't aim for Silas. He aimed for the main console controlling the stasis pods of the captured Pokémon. No. Alden screamed, lunging for a control panel, but he was too late. Pikachu slammed into the console with the force of a lightning strike. The entire system blew out in a shower of sparks and smoke. Alarms blared. Red emergency lights bathed the lab in a hellish glow. The clamps holding the Pokémon retracted. The helmets and cybernetics sparked and went dead. The Macamp ripped its arms free, roaring with pent-up fury. The Boltund shook its head, its eyes clearing. And in the center of the room, the Charizard, its wings still fused with dead metal, let out a gut-wrenching roar of pain and rage. Its tail flame, once a sickly green, sputtered and reignited into a true, brilliant orange. The lab was now filled with freed, furious, and traumatized Pokémon. They didn't know friend from foe. They just knew pain. You see, Ash? Silas yelled over the chaos, backing away towards his exit. You see the chaos you unleash? This is what you fight for. The glass partition between Ash and Amara shattered into a million pieces as she finally unleashed a fraction of her true power. She floated to his side, her eyes glowing with purple fire. Silas had what he needed. His speech hadn't been to convert Ash. It had been to stall. A small device on his wrist had been scanning them the entire time, capturing the unique resonance of their symbiotic bond. The final piece of data he needed to ensure his own fusion with the Null would be stable. This changes nothing, Silas declared, a triumphant, terrible light in his eyes. He held up the device on his wrist. I have what I came for. The key to controlling my own transformation. Your bond will be the blueprint for my ascension. He disappeared into the dark chamber, a heavy metal door slamming shut behind him. The entire facility began to shake, the sounds of a self-destruct sequence echoing through the halls. We have to go. Ash yelled, recalling Pikachu. And we're not leaving them behind. He and Amara had to fight their way out, not against Aegis soldiers, but against the freed Pokémon, who were lashing out in their pain and confusion. It was a heartbreaking battle. Ash didn't fight back. He and Amara used their combined power to create psychic shields, to absorb attacks, to project calming waves of empathy, trying to cut through the Pokémon's terror. They managed to guide most of them towards a cargo elevator, a path to the surface. But the cybernetic Charizard, maddened by its ordeal, blocked their path, unleashing a torrent of dragon fire. It saw Ash as just another human, another source of its pain. Ash stood his ground, his own Charizard's Pokeball in his hand. But he didn't throw it. I'm not going to fight you, he said, his voice cutting through the roar of the flames. He projected his own memories of his Charizard, of their bond, of soaring through the sky together. He showed it not a challenge, but a promise of freedom. The cybernetic Charizard hesitated, its rage faltering in the face of such profound empathy. In that moment of hesitation, Ash, Sceptile, and his other Pokémon managed to herd the last of the freed Pokémon to safety. As the facility began to collapse around them, Ash and Amara fled, emerging into the cold Galarian night just as the first of the biodomes imploded behind them in a plume of fire and earth. They had destroyed Protocol Chimera. They had freed the captive Pokémon. But Silas was gone. And he had the final key to his horrific plan. Far away, in his private transport jet speeding away from the burning facility, Silas looked at the data on his wrist-mounted device. The scan was perfect. The resonant frequency of the apex bond. He opened a secure channel. Commander Valerius. Report. The extraction is complete, Grand Master, her voice came back, tinged with the static of the tundra's blizzard. We have the dormant heart. A thin, triumphant smile crossed Silas's face. He looked out the window at the dark world below, a world he was about to save from itself. Excellent. Return to Sanctum. It is time to awaken our primary asset. It is time for the shepherd to take up his crook. Chapter 7, The Silent Calamity. The victory at the Galar facility felt like ashes in Ash's mouth. They had won the battle, but the war had taken a terrifying turn. Cynthia's voice, coming through the encrypted comms device, was grim and laced with static, a pale echo from a world that was rapidly falling apart. It's happening, Ash, she said, her signal routed through 3 separate satellite systems to avoid Aegis interception. Ash could hear alarms and panicked shouts in the background of her transmission from the Sinnoh League headquarters. It started an hour ago. A progressive, global degradation of what our scientists are calling spiritual energy. It's a quiet apocalypse. Ash stood on the highest peak of the bell tower in Ekrutik City, a place of sacred connection. Ho-Oh, a magnificent rainbow of divine fire, circled high above, its presence a comfort against the growing dread. But even its vibrant colors seemed softer. Less brilliant. He could feel it. The world was fading. It wasn't a physical change, not yet. The sky was still blue, the sun still warm. But the vibrancy was gone. The air, which should have been alive with the hum of a million intersecting life forces, was growing still. The cheerful chirps of the Pidgey on the tower's ancient rooftops were becoming infrequent, their calls listless. It was as if someone were slowly turning down the volume of the world. What's Silas doing? Ash asked, his voice tight. He's broadcasting, Cynthia replied. From a fortress we never knew existed. Sanctum. It appeared on our long-range scans 30 minutes ago, floating over the northern sea, shielded by an energy field that is absorbing all attempts to scan it. From this fortress, he is projecting a global field. It isn't killing Pokemon, Ash. It's erasing them. It's negating the very life force that makes them what they are. The most powerful are being affected first. We're getting reports from all over the world. The lake guardians of Sinnoh have fallen silent. Articuno has reportedly ceased its flight and settled on a glacier, unmoving. The silent calamity. That's what the media is calling it. Ho-Oh let out a mournful cry, a sound that should have been a symphony of rebirth and hope. Now, it was a dirge. It spiraled lower, its rainbow plumage flickering like a dying candle flame. It was fighting the field, its divine essence a bulwark against the creeping silence, but the effort was costing it dearly. The null is no longer a weapon, Amara projected, her mental voice stripped of all academic detachment, replaced by a cold, hard fury. She stood beside Ash, her fists clenched, her amethyst eyes blazing. He has turned it into an atmosphere. He has merged with the entity from the temple. He is poisoning the planet with nothingness. Below them, in the streets of Ekrutik, Ash could see it. A trainer's Growlithe, which should have been bounding with energy, lay listlessly at its owner's feet. The world was falling asleep, and it might never wake up. There was no more time for strategy. No more time for gathering allies. This was the final battle. Cynthia, Ash said, his voice ringing with a new, hard-edged authority. Where is Lugia? The Whirl Islands. It's trying to shield the region with its own power, but the strain is, it can't last. Tell it to meet us at the fortress, Ash commanded. Tell every champion, every Elite Four member, every trainer strong enough to fight, that the world needs them right now. We are making our stand. He ended the transmission. He looked at Ho-Oh, the magnificent bird now hovering before him, its great head bowed. The fire fades, Ho-Oh communicated, its voice a whisper of dying embers in his mind. The silence, it is so cold. Then we will be the fire, Ash said, his hand resting on the ancient Pokémon's warm plumage. He poured his own spirit, his own unwavering will, into the touch. Just a little longer. Fight with us. Ho-Oh raised its head, a spark of its old fire reigniting in its eyes. It let out a defiant cry that tore through the muted air. The assault on Sanctum was an act of global, desperate defiance. The fortress was a vision of sterile perfection, a stark white and gray citadel that hung in the sky like a shard of broken bone. It was vast, miles across, a floating island of cold logic in a world of chaotic life. A shimmering, invisible dome of pure null energy surrounded it, causing the very air around it to distort. It was a fortress that didn't just repel attacks, but unmade them. Cynthia, acting as their battlefield commander, had rallied what forces she could. Jets from multiple Pokémon leagues, brave trainers on the backs of their Flygon and Salamence, formed a makeshift armada. They were the first to engage, firing beams of energy at the shield, only to watch them dissolve into nothingness yards from their target. Then came the gods. Lugia rose from the sea, a silver titan wreathed in arcane blue light. Ho-Oh descended from the heavens, a comet of sacred fire. They struck the null shield together, a cataclysmic impact of life and anti-life. The shield buckled, groaning under the assault of two of the world's most powerful legends. But it held. The divine energy of the two great birds was being visibly siphoned away, their forms flickering, their light dimming with every passing second. "They're buying us an opening." Ash yelled over the roar of the wind. He was on the back of his Charizard, soaring towards the fortress. Amara flew beside them, a lavender streak of pure power. "The shield is weakest where they're striking. We have to get through." They dove, aiming for the spot where Lugia's Aeroblast and Ho-Oh's Sacred Fire were concentrating. As they neared the shield, the silent calamity intensified 100-fold. Ash felt it like a physical blow, a wave of profound apathy and exhaustion. The will to fight, the will to live, was being drained out of him. Ash. Amara's voice was a sharp spike in his mind, cutting through the lethargy. "Focus on me. Do not let the silence in." He gritted his teeth, the memory of that empty void where Pikachu should have been flashing in his mind. The rage from that moment was a fire that the silence could not quench. But it wasn't enough. The null field was too strong. They were 100 yards out and Charizard was already faltering, his flight becoming sluggish, his flame shrinking. "It's too dense," Amara stated, her own form flickering as she poured her power into a protective barrier around them. "We cannot break through. It is designed to dissolve psychic and spiritual energy on contact." They were going to fail. They were going to watch the world die from the outside. "Then don't use our power," Ash grunted, an idea born of pure desperation forming in his mind. "Don't push. Don't fight. Just, be." He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a trust that was absolute. "Amara. Open your mind to me. All of it. No walls. No secrets. And let me do the same. Let's hide our power inside our bond. Don't show the shield a weapon. Show it a single, unified soul." It was the ultimate gamble. To merge their consciousness so completely in the face of an energy that unmade consciousness. It was insane. It was illogical. It was the only way. Amara stared at him, her amethyst eyes wide. She had shared glimpses of her mind, echoes of her past. But to open herself completely? To give him access to her core programming, her foundational loneliness, her burgeoning, confusing feelings for him? It was an act of vulnerability she had never imagined. She saw the unwavering trust in his eyes. He wasn't asking her to be a tool. He was asking her to be a partner, in the truest, most absolute sense of the word. Together, she sent back, a single word that was a vow. She closed her eyes. He closed his. They let go. Their minds merged. It was not a link, not a connection. It was a fusion of essence. Ash felt her vast, cold, logical mind, a universe of perfect, crystalline data. But he also felt the core of her being, the terrified, lonely child in the glass tube. Amara felt his heart, a supernova of chaotic, brilliant emotions, love, loyalty, grief, and an unbreakable, irrational hope. She felt every bond he had ever formed, a web of golden light connecting him to hundreds of beings across the world. To the null shield, they ceased to be two high-energy targets. They became one, their combined essence hidden within the complex, paradoxical shell of their fused consciousness. They were no longer a wave to be broken, but a single, strange stone, and they slipped through the cracks in the shield. They passed through the barrier. The silence inside the fortress was absolute. The air was cold, sterile, and utterly dead. There were no guards, no Pokémon, no life. Only white, featureless corridors and the low, soul-crushing hum of the null field projector. They found Silas in the heart of Sanctum, in a vast, circular chamber that resembled a dark, inverted cathedral. He floated in the center of the room, his body transformed. He was no longer human. He was a figure of shimmering, oily anti-light, a humanoid-shaped void in reality. His face was a smooth, featureless mask, and where his eyes should have been were 2 points of absolute blackness that seemed to drink the light from the room. The dormant heart, a pulsating crystal of pure darkness, was embedded in his chest, the source of his terrible power. He had become the shepherd. He had become the null. "So, you have pierced the veil," Silas's voice echoed, not from his mouth, but from the very air around them. It was a dispassionate, emotionless sound, like the whisper of entropy. "Impressive. But you have only brought your light into my darkness, and here, darkness consumes all." He raised a hand, and a wave of pure nothingness washed towards them. "Sceptile, leaf storm." Ash roared, his mind still partially merged with Amara's, his command seamlessly translated into her power. Amara didn't fire a psychic blast. She manifested the idea of Sceptile's attack, a whirlwind of razor-sharp psychic leaves that met the null wave head-on. The leaves didn't shatter, they withered, aged, and crumbled to dust in an instant, their conceptual existence erased. "Your power is meaningless here," Silas's voice droned. "Life is a fleeting, chaotic anomaly. I am bringing the universe back to its natural, peaceful state, silence. Order. Nothingness." He was no longer the grieving father. He was a dispassionate god of entropy, a force of nature as implacable as gravity. Pikachu leaped from Ash's shoulder, his body crackling with a furious energy born of their shared defiance. "Pikachu!" he screamed, unleashing a thunderbolt of unprecedented power, a golden spear of pure life and loyalty aimed directly at Silas's heart. Silas didn't even move. The bolt of lightning, a force that could shatter mountains, simply vanished a foot from his chest, its energy consumed, its existence negated without a sound. "You see," Silas said. "Even your bond, your most powerful weapon, is just a flicker of heat in the face of the inevitable cold." He gestured again, and this time, a focused beam of null energy shot towards Ash. It was faster, more concentrated, than anything the Scions had used. There was no time to dodge. No time to shield. In that split second, one of Ash's oldest and most steadfast partners acted. A flash of green, a blur of motion. Sceptile, who had been recalled and then released again in the heat of battle, threw itself in front of Ash. The null beam struck Sceptile square in the chest. There was no explosion. No cry of pain. For a heartbeat, Sceptile's form flickered, its vibrant green color fading to a washed-out gray. Its sharp, intelligent eyes went wide, not with pain, but with a sudden, profound confusion. Ash felt their bond, a connection forged in 100 forests and 1,000 battles, a thread of fierce pride and unshakable loyalty, snap. Sceptile didn't fall. It didn't die. It dissolved. Its body broke apart into a cloud of gray, lifeless motes that drifted on the dead air for a moment before fading into utter nothingness. Gone. The pokeball on Ash's belt, Sceptile's home, clattered to the floor, its light extinguished. It was empty. Not just empty of a Pokemon, but empty of a spirit. It was a hollow, dead thing. The psychic backlash was apocalyptic. Because their minds were merged, Amara felt the severance as if it were her own. The sudden, violent tearing of that golden thread of connection, the absolute, irreversible silence where a life had been, it slammed into her consciousness with the force of a supernova. Her logical mind, her entire being, had no framework for this kind of pain, this kind of loss. A scream of pure, psychic agony tore from her, cracking the very walls of the chamber. Ash fell to his knees. The shock was so profound it was physical. He couldn't breathe. His heart felt like it had been ripped from his chest. Sceptile, gone. Not fainted. Not injured. Erased from existence. He reached out, his hand trembling, towards the empty space where his friend had been. There was nothing. Only the cold, silent air. He knelt there, cradling the empty, dead pokeball, the silence of his lost friend screaming in his mind, a sound far louder than any explosion. Across the chamber, the void-like figure of Silas watched, his featureless face impassive. He tilted his head, a gesture of mild, academic curiosity. He had not felt grief. He had not felt triumph. He had felt nothing at all. This, he believed, was peace. Chapter 8, The Apex Bond. The silence in Ash's soul was a gaping wound. It was not the absence of sound, but the absence of presence. Where the proud, fierce, loyal spirit of his Sceptile had been a constant, comforting warmth for years, there was now a void. A cold, terrifying nothingness that threatened to consume everything else. Grief, raw and absolute, crashed over him, a tsunami that should have shattered him. It should have broken him. Silas was counting on it. The null feeds on despair, on the entropy of a spirit giving up. But as Ash knelt there, the dead weight of the empty pokeball in his hand, something else rose through the grief. It was a fire. It was the memory of Sceptile's final act, not a cry of fear, but a silent, defiant choice. A sacrifice made not in submission, but in love. And that love, that bond, was a truth that the null could not erase. It was an energy that nothingness could not consume. He looked up, and the tears streaming down his face were illuminated by the furious, incandescent fire in his eyes. Amara was reeling, her powerful mind fractured by the psychic backlash of Sceptile's erasure. The concept of such a total loss was anathema to her, a logical paradox that her consciousness could not resolve. She was flickering, her form wavering, her power unraveling under the weight of an emotion for which she had no name. Ash reached out, not with his hand, but with his half of their shared soul. He pushed through her pain and his own, and he sent her a single, clear thought. Not a command. A lifeline. He's not gone. Not really. We remember him. That's what a bond is. It's a promise to remember. He shared the memory of Sceptile as a young, stubborn Trico. He shared the pride of its evolution into Grovyle. He shared the triumph of its victory over Darkrai in the Sinnoh League. He poured the life and light of Sceptile's story into the void that Null had created, and into the wound in Amara's mind. The fire of his memory met her logic, and a new equation was formed. Grief was not the end. It was the proof of existence. Amara's form solidified. The panicked terror in her amethyst eyes was forged into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She understood. Silas thought he was fighting power. He thought he was fighting two beings. He was wrong. He was fighting a memory. He was fighting a promise. He was fighting a bond, and that was a battle he could not win. Ash stood up, his movements slow, deliberate. He placed Sceptile's empty pokeball carefully on his belt, not as a grave marker, but as a sworn oath. "You're wrong, Silas," Ash said, his voice quiet, yet it resonated through the dead air of the chamber, a living sound in a dead space. You think power is the answer. You think force can create order. But you can't fight the null with power. Power is what it eats. He turned to Amara, not in the physical world, but within their shared consciousness. Their minds, still fused, were a universe of their own. No more holding back, he sent to her. Not your power, not my heart. Everything. Together. One. It was the final step. The complete synthesis. She had seen his heart, and he had seen her loneliness. They had shared fear and grief and a fragile, burgeoning hope. There was nothing left to hide. One, she replied, her own essence surging forward to meet his, not with hesitation, but with a fierce, possessive, and total acceptance. It was not a fusion of bodies. It was an ascension of spirit. Ash's soul, with its limitless empathy, its unbreakable web of bonds woven over a lifetime of adventure and love, became the framework, the operating system. Amara's consciousness, with its infinite psychic potential, its flawless logic, its godlike processing power, became the engine. Her mind became the driver, his heart became the compass. Light and shadow, logic and emotion, power and empathy, all intertwined. In the center of the chamber, the two figures of Ash and Amara dissolved. For a moment, there was only a blinding column of energy, a swirling vortex of amethyst and gold. When it subsided, a new being stood before Silas. It was Ash's form, but he seemed taller, his presence immense. His eyes glowed with the same amethyst light as Amara's, but within them burned the familiar, unquenchable fire of his own spirit. A faint, golden aura, the color of a sunrise, pulsed around him, intertwined with a shimmering lavender corona of psychic energy. He wasn't just a man wielding psychic power. He wasn't just a psychic entity experiencing human emotion. They were something new. They were the apex bond, made manifest. What is this? Silas's dispassionate voice held a flicker of something new. A variable he had not calculated. Confusion. This, the being that was both Ash and Amara replied, its voice a perfect harmony of his warmth and her clarity, is life. The final battle began. It was not a war of beams and explosions. It was a war for the nature of reality itself. Silas, the avatar of Null, gestured, and a section of the floor beneath them simply ceased to be, revealing the churning, storm-tossed sea thousands of feet below. The new entity did not fly. It simply was. It remained floating in the empty space, and from its hand, a seed of golden light fell into the abyss. It sprouted, and a bridge of living wood, covered in glowing moss and familiar, Sinnoh-native flowers, grew in an instant, spanning the chasm. He did not create an object. He willed a memory of a peaceful forest path into existence. Silas attacked again, unleashing a wave of absolute silence, the same energy that was bleeding the world dry. It washed over the new being, seeking to pacify its will, to erase its spirit. But instead of shielding, the entity opened itself completely. And it began to sing. It was a psychic song, broadcast with Amara's infinite power, but composed of Ash's memories. It was the sound of Pikachu's cheerful cry on the first day of their journey. It was the roar of Charizard's loyalty as it chose him over its own ambition. It was the quiet, steadfast pride of Sceptile. It was the joyful splash of 1,000 Lapras, the fierce cry of a Pidgeotto, the quiet companionship of every Pokémon he had ever met, loved, and fought alongside. It was a symphony of 1 billion tiny moments of connection. The song slammed into the silence. It was not an attack. It was an answer. It was a defiant declaration that life, in all its messy, chaotic, beautiful noise, was preferable to the clean, sterile peace of nothingness. The silent calamity across the world faltered. The oppressive quiet was pierced by 1 billion points of light as every trainer, every Pokémon, felt the echo of that song, the memory of their own bonds reignited by Ash's broadcast. The colors of the world, which had been fading to gray, began to bleed back in, more vibrant than before. Silas recoiled, his featureless face contorting. No. Silence is peace. Order. He focused his full power, the entire might of the dormant heart, into one final, desperate act of erasure. A sphere of perfect, absolute blackness, a localized black hole of anti-existence, formed and shot towards his enemy. The being that was Ash and Amara did not try to stop it. It did not try to destroy it. It did the one thing that was truly, utterly illogical. It embraced it. It flew forward and met the sphere of nothingness. As it was engulfed, it did not fight. It did not resist. It poured its own essence, the entirety of its fused being, into the null. It poured life into the void. It showed the ancient, mindless entity of the null the concept of a shared meal. The feeling of a sunset. The sting of a scraped knee. The warmth of a hug. The bitter taste of loss and the soaring joy of reunion. It took the sum of Ash Ketchum's life, a life defined by connection, and it force-fed it to a being that had only ever known absence. The null, which had only ever known the simple, binary state of being and not being, was overwhelmed. It was drowned in the sheer, chaotic, paradoxical, and beautiful complexity of existence. It could not compute love. It could not parse grief. It could not erase hope. The black sphere shattered. Not in an explosion, but in a release. A wave of pure, unfiltered life energy washed out from the chamber, across the planet. It was not a healing wave. It was an awakening. Every living thing felt it. The world, which had been falling silent, roared back to life with a defiant, joyful cry. In the center of the chamber, the shimmering anti-light of Silas's form was torn away. He fell to the ground, no longer a god, no longer a void, but a man. Just a man. He lay on the floor, weeping, as the decades of grief he had suppressed, the pain of losing his family that he had tried to weaponize into a cold philosophy, finally, mercifully, washed over him. He was no longer a shepherd. He was just a lost soul, finally feeling the pain he had tried so hard to erase from the world. The dormant heart, the crystal of null energy, clattered to the floor beside him. It was no longer black. It was a milky, opalescent gray, the void within it now seeded with the faintest flicker of light. It was no longer an absolute nothing. It had been changed. Stabilized. The being of Ash and Amara slowly separated back into two distinct figures. They were exhausted, their very souls aching from the strain, but they were whole. Ash stood on his own 2 feet, the amethyst glow in his eyes fading back to his warm, familiar brown. Amara floated beside him, her lavender aura soft and calm. The crisis was over. In the aftermath, they stood before a council of the world's leaders and its legends. Lugia and Ho-Oh, their colors restored to their full, brilliant glory, looked on with a new, profound respect. Cynthia, Lance, Stephen, all the champions stood in silent awe. The world had been saved, not by an army, not by a god, but by a bond. Ash, speaking with a quiet authority that no one dared question, explained what they had done. They had not destroyed the null. They had taught it. It was no longer a purely destructive force, but a fundamental part of the universe, balanced now by the memory of the life it had touched. Silas was taken into custody, a broken man who would now have to face the world he had tried to unmake. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows from the peaks of Mount Silver, Ash and Amara stood on a quiet, windswept cliff, watching the world breathe. Pikachu was on his shoulder, his presence a solid, comforting weight. The wound from Sceptile's loss was still there, a sharp, aching pain. But it was not a void anymore. It was a space filled with memory, with pride, with love. It was a scar that proved a life had been lived. Amara drifted closer, her usual foot of distance between them gone. She was just there. Beside him. A silent, constant presence. Your claim, Ash said softly, not looking at her. Back on Mount Quina. You said you were claiming me as your mate. It was a logical declaration based on my directive, she replied, her mental voice a soft echo in his mind. You were the optimal candidate to fulfill my primary function. And now, he asked. Is that still what this is? A function? She was silent for a long moment. He felt her mind processing, not with the cold logic of a computer, but with the warm, hesitant contemplation of a heart learning a new language. Her hand, cool and smooth, found his. She didn't just touch it. She laced her fingers through his, a gesture she had learned from his own memories. It was a gesture of partnership. Of equality. Of choice. My directive was to create the ultimate trainer, she sent, her thoughts a soft whisper against his. My analysis was flawed. I believed it was a fusion of power and potential. A formula to be solved. She turned her amethyst eyes to him, and for the first time, he saw no analysis, no logic, no psychic power. He just saw her. I was wrong, she said. The ultimate trainer is not a single being. It is a bond, freely chosen, and strong enough to remember those we have lost. Her grip on his hand tightened, a silent, eloquent promise. My claim stands. Not as a directive. But as a choice. My choice. Ash smiled, a genuine, weary, and hopeful smile. He squeezed her hand, his own choice made clear in that simple, shared touch. They were not a master and a partner, not a human and a Pokemon, not a catalyst and a vessel. They were Ash and Amara. And together, facing a future unknown, they were something more. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.